Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been meaning to share this for years, but every time I start typing it out, I delete everything and close my laptop. It's been over 20 years now, and I still can't shake what happened that night at Lake Shasta. I'm not some newbie camper or someone who spooks easily. I've been camping since I was a kid, probably logged hundreds of nights in the California wilderness before this happened. I know what normal forest sounds are. I know what animals sound like moving through brush. This wasn't that. It was April 19th, 2003. The date is burned into my memory. My buddies and I had set up at Jones Valley Campground at Lake Shasta for a weekend fishing trip. Nothing fancy. We had a small camper and a tent. Most of the guys had turned in early because we planned to be on the water before sunrise. I'm always the night owl of the group, so I stayed up by the campfire. Around 10 that night, I was just sitting there watching the fire die down, nursing my last beer. The campground wasn't full. It was still early in the season and kind of chilly at night. Our site was pretty far from others. Backing up against a thicker section of woods, I remember noticing how unnaturally quiet it had gotten. At first, I didn't really register it consciously, but then it hit me. There were absolutely no sounds, no crickets chirping, no frogs, no rustling leaves, nothing, just dead silence. That's when I heard the first snap. It was loud, like a baseball bat breaking, a distinct crack of a large branch somewhere in the woods behind our camp, maybe 50 yards back. I perked up immediately. That wasn't a branch falling naturally. Something broke it, something heavy. I've heard bears moving through woods before. They're not subtle. They crash around, snap twigs, rustle bushes. This was different. It was a single, isolated crack. Then nothing. Total silence again. I sat there, completely still, beer forgotten in my hand, just listening. Maybe 10 minutes passed with nothing. I was starting to think maybe it was just a random branch falling when I heard another snap. This one was closer, maybe 40 yards away now, and off to the right of where the first sound came from, like whatever made that noise had moved. The hair on my arms stood up. Again, just a single crack, then silence, no rustling. No movement sounds before or after, just crack, then nothing. I stood up and walked to the edge of our campsite, peering into the darkness. The fire was almost out by then, and there was no moon that night. I couldn't see more than a few feet into the trees. I remember thinking I should get my flashlight from the camper, but I didn't want to stop listening. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate steps, heavy. I counted somewhere between 10 and 13 distinct footfalls moving in my direction from where that second branch had snapped. The steps were evenly spaced, like something walking upright. Not a bear. Bears don't walk on two legs for that many consecutive steps. Not a deer either. Too heavy, too deliberate. The steps stopped. Complete silence again. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I kept staring into the darkness, trying to see something, anything, but it was like looking into black ink. Then another branch snapped. This one was close, maybe 10 yards from the edge of our campsite. Whatever it was practically right there. I'm not ashamed to admit I was scared shitless at this point. I rushed back to the camper and woke up my buddy Mike. I remember whispering urgently, trying not to wake everyone else. "Mike, there's something out there. I need you to come listen." Mike was groggy and annoyed at first, but he must have seen how freaked out I was because he got up without arguing. We stepped back outside and I put my finger to my lips, signaling him to be quiet. We stood there for maybe 2 minutes in complete silence. Mike was about to say something when we heard it. 3 or 4 more heavy footsteps, closer now, just beyond the tree line at the edge of our site. Mike's eyes went wide. He felt it too. That wasn't normal. The footsteps stopped again, and we could feel something watching us from the darkness. Mike whispered, "What the fuck is that?" I just shook my head. I didn't know. After another minute of nothing, Mike headed back to the camper. He said something about getting some sleep, but I could tell he was spooked. He just wanted to be inside. I stayed out there for maybe another minute, straining to see into the darkness. The dying embers of the fire cast just enough light to make shadows dance at the edge of the woods, but not enough to see anything real. Finally, I gave up and went inside too, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night, just lay there listening. I didn't hear anything else outside, but that almost made it worse. It was like whatever it was knew we were alert now and had gone silent. The next morning, I went out to look around as soon as the sun was up. I searched the woods near our campsite for a good hour. The ground was covered in pine needles and leaves, so I couldn't find any clear footprints. I did find a couple of broken branches, but nothing conclusive. My buddies mostly laughed it off, said it was probably just a bear, or maybe even another camper taking a nighttime stroll. But Mike was quiet. He knew what we heard wasn't normal. Here's the thing that still bothers me 20 years later. I've spent my whole life outdoors. I've encountered bears, mountain lions, all kinds of wildlife. I know what they sound like. Bears make noise constantly when they move, snapping twigs, rustling bushes, huffing and puffing. Mountain lions are stealthy, but don't snap big branches like that. Deer move quickly with light steps, not slow and deliberate. Humans talk, use flashlights, make human sounds. Whatever was in those woods that night moved methodically. It would make a single loud noise, then go completely silent for long periods, then another noise, closer, like it was deliberately letting me know it was approaching. The footsteps were heavy, but controlled, evenly spaced, bipedal. It walked like a person, but no person I know moves through pitch-black woods at night without a light, making almost no sound except for occasional deliberate noises. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was some local messing with campers. Maybe it was a bear that just happened to walk on its hind legs longer than normal. But deep down, I know better. The precision of it all, the intelligence behind the movement pattern, it was hunting, testing, watching our reactions. We finished our camping trip, but I didn't stay up alone by the fire again. Nothing else happened that weekend, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I was outside the camper. I've been back to Lake Shasta many times since then. It's a beautiful place, and I refuse to let one unexplained experience ruin it for me. But I never camp at Jones Valley anymore, and I never stay up alone by a dying campfire. The logical part of my brain wants to file this away as just an odd experience with a large animal. But there's another part of me, the primitive part that recognizes danger on a cellular level, that knows whatever was stalking our campsite that night wasn't something most people encounter. It moved with purpose and intelligence. It wanted me to know it was there, getting closer, step by step. I've heard stories since then, rumors about tall creatures in the forests around Shasta. I used to dismiss those as campfire tales. Now, I'm not so sure. All I know is that the woods get awfully quiet sometimes, right before something breaks a branch nearby. And when that happens, I don't stick around to find out what it is. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear those same measured, deliberate footsteps outside my bedroom window. Footsteps that stop, then start again, closer. I lie there in the dark, holding my breath, waiting, just like I did that night in April, 20 years ago, when something decided to let me know I wasn't alone in the darkness. Story 2: I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened to us back in August 2008. It's been 15 years, but I remember every detail, like it was yesterday. I've never been the type to believe in monsters or cryptids, but what we experienced in those woods changed my perspective forever. I'd been planning this camping trip with my 3 buddies, Mike, Dave, and Sean, for months. We all needed to escape our boring office jobs, and I'd been itching to check out this remote spot in the upper Calawash River area of the Oregon Cascade Range. east of Estacada. A rafting guide I met at a bar a few months earlier had told me about it after I mentioned my interest in Bigfoot. I remember him leaning in like he was sharing some big secret and saying, "If you want to find Sasquatch, that's where you need to go." My friends weren't exactly thrilled about the Bigfoot hunting aspect when I told them. Mike actually laughed in my face, and Dave rolled his eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. Sean was more polite, but clearly skeptical. Still, they were up for camping somewhere secluded, so they went along with my plan. We arrived at the spot on a Friday afternoon. It took us almost an hour on this old, overgrown logging road that didn't even show up on our GPS. The campsite was perfect, a small clearing near a creek, surrounded by dense forest, with a power line clearing about half a mile up a steep hill. The trees around us were massive old-growth conifers that blocked out most of the sunlight, making the forest floor dark even during the day. We set up our tents, built a fire pit, and spent the evening grilling burgers and drinking beers. The conversation was the usual stuff: work complaints, sports, and Dave's latest dating disasters. I tried bringing up Bigfoot a couple times, showing them some research I'd done, but they just teased me about it. Mike kept doing this ridiculous ape walk around the fire that had everyone cracking up. As night fell, the forest got incredibly dark, like can't see your hand in front of your face dark. The stars were amazing though, one of those skies you only get when you're miles from civilization. We stayed up late, probably until around 11, when things started getting weird. The first wood knock echoed from somewhere across the valley to the east. At first I thought I was imagining things, but then it happened again. 4 quick knocks in succession, like someone hitting a baseball bat against a tree. Not random like a branch falling or an animal moving around. These were deliberate patterns. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked. They had. We all went quiet, listening. About 30 seconds later there was a response. Similar knocks, but from the south, then another set from the north. "Probably just hunters," Sean suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. "At this hour," Dave replied, "and making those patterns." The knocking continued for the next couple hours, and what freaked us out most was how it seemed to be closing in on our campsite from multiple directions. It wasn't like gunshots, which have that sharp crack. These were deeper, more resonant, and they were definitely communicating with each other. By 1 in the morning, Mike was visibly shaken. He kept looking over his shoulder into the darkness beyond our fire. "I don't like this, man," he said. "This doesn't feel right." Dave agreed. "Let's drive up to that power line clearing. At least we can see what's around us up there." I was disappointed. This was exactly what I'd come for, and now they wanted to bail at the first sign of something unusual. "You guys go ahead," I told them. "I'll stay here and keep the fire going." They tried to convince me to come with them, but I was stubborn. Eventually they piled into Mike's truck and headed up the hill to the clearing, leaving me alone at the campsite. As soon as their headlights disappeared, the forest went dead silent. Not the normal quiet of the woods at night, with insects chirping and small animals rustling. This was a complete absence of sound, like everything was holding its breath. The hair on my arms stood up. Then I heard it, the unmistakable snap of sticks breaking, coming from the direction my friends had driven. Something was moving through the woods, and it wasn't being particularly careful about staying quiet. I've spent my whole life outdoors, grew up in Montana, hunting and fishing with my dad since I was old enough to walk. I've encountered bears, mountain lions, all kinds of wildlife. But something about this felt different. Wrong. I found myself building up the fire much bigger than necessary, piling on logs until the flames were almost 6 feet high. About 20 minutes later, I heard Mike's truck returning. The headlights swept through the trees as they pulled back into camp. They all looked tense. "Did you knock rocks together while we were gone?" Dave asked immediately. "What? No," I replied, confused. "Why?" Mike jumped in. "We heard something up there. Distinct sounds. like someone hitting rocks together, coming from down here near camp. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't make any sounds, but something was moving around after you left. I heard branches breaking. We stayed up for another hour, all of us now on edge, before finally deciding to try to get some sleep. Nobody wanted to admit they were too scared to turn in, but I could see it on their faces. Same fear I was feeling. I couldn't sleep. I lay in my tent, listening to every sound in the forest. Around 3:30 in the morning, I heard something that still haunts my dreams. A low, rumbling growl, followed by a series of huffing noises. The first came from near our dying fire, maybe 30 feet from my tent. Then a second voice, and I'm certain it was a different individual, answered from directly behind my tent on the other side of the clearing. These weren't bear sounds. I know what bears sound like. These vocalizations had an almost language-like quality to them. The first would make this rumbling call, then the second would answer with similar sounds, but in a different pattern. This continued for nearly an hour, with the two voices occasionally being joined by what seemed like a third from further away. I was frozen in my sleeping bag, barely breathing, my heart pounding so hard I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. I wanted to wake my friends, but their tents were across the clearing, and I was terrified of moving. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion. When I woke up the next morning, the others were already up, looking as exhausted as I felt. No one had slept well. We didn't talk much about the night as we packed up camp. I think we were all trying to rationalize what we'd experienced. Mike suggested it was probably just elk, or maybe even people messing with us, though we hadn't seen another soul since arriving. We were about 5 miles down Forest Road 43, heading back toward the highway, when it happened. Something massive burst out of the trees and crossed the road about 100 yards ahead of us. Mike slammed on the brakes, nearly sending us into the dashboard. "Holy shit," Dave yelled from the back seat. "Did you see that?" It had moved so quickly, but its size was unmistakable. Standing upright, dark brown or black, it had to be at least 9 feet tall. The way it moved wasn't like a person in a suit or a bear on hind legs. It crossed that road in 3 or 4 powerful strides, showing incredible speed and agility for something so large. Mike pulled the truck forward slowly to where it had crossed. Without discussing it, we all got out to look. There was a clear trail where something had come down the steep incline on one side of the road. Small trees were broken and moss was torn up from the ground. "Let's check it out," I suggested, already heading toward the trees. "Are you insane?" Sean replied. But he followed anyway, as did the others. We'd gone about 20 yards into the forest when we heard something large crash through the underbrush ahead of us, moving away at high speed. The sound of breaking branches and heavy footfalls faded as whatever it was retreated deeper into the forest. That's when Dave called out, "Guys, look at this." In a patch of soft, mossy ground was a footprint. Not just any footprint. This thing was enormous, at least 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toes. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was incredibly heavy. Around it were several partial prints, not as clear, but definitely from the same source. We stood there staring at that footprint for what felt like forever. No one said a word. What could we say? It was undeniable evidence of what we'd all just seen. A Sasquatch in the Oregon wilderness. The drive home was mostly silent. We tried talking about it a few times, but the conversation always fizzled out. How do you process something like that? Something that completely contradicts what you've been taught about the world. I've gone back to those woods twice since then, alone. Never saw anything like what we experienced that weekend, but both times I heard the wood knocks in the distance. I don't tell many people about what happened. Most would think I'm crazy or making it up for attention, but I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know that deep in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, there are things that science hasn't explained yet. Things that have probably been there longer than we have. And sometimes, if you're in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time, you might just encounter them. Story 3. I still question myself about what I saw that day in '74. Not because I doubt what I witnessed, but because it shouldn't have been possible. I've been an outdoorsman my entire life. Grew up hunting and fishing in Nebraska, spent countless hours in the woods tracking deer, watching wildlife, learning their patterns. I know what a bear looks like, what a moose looks like, what every damn animal native to the Midwest looks like. What I saw that afternoon in late '74 wasn't any of those things. It was a clear day in November, unseasonably warm. I remember because I had my window cracked open while driving southbound on Highway 77 near Blue Springs. I was heading back from a business meeting in Lincoln, looking forward to getting home before dark. The road was mostly empty, just the occasional car passing northbound. The sunlight was that golden late afternoon kind that makes everything look a little more vivid. I'd driven this stretch hundreds of times. Nothing remarkable about it, just farmland, some gentle hills, patches of trees here and there along the creeks. I was probably doing about 55, just cruising along, radio playing something forgettable, when I rounded this gradual curve. That's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. About 50 feet ahead, this figure stepped out from the ditch on the west side of the road, just stepped right out like it was the most normal thing in the world. But there was nothing normal about it. This thing was massive, not just tall, though it had to be 7, maybe 8 feet high, but substantial, built like a linebacker ×3. The first thing that struck me was how thick its legs were. I'm talking tree trunk thick. These weren't spindly legs like you'd see on a bear standing up. These were powerful, muscular limbs designed for covering ground. I instinctively hit the brakes, not hard enough to skid, but enough to slow down considerably. Time seemed to stretch out. I swear I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, drowning out the radio. In 3 strides, just 3, this thing crossed the entire 2-lane highway. That's what I can't get out of my head even now. 3 strides. Not running, not hurrying, just walking with purpose. Each step covered what would take me 4 or 5 steps. And then it disappeared into the eastern ditch, heading toward a small stand of trees about 100 yards from the road. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I was still rolling forward, much slower now. And I noticed a car that had been coming from the opposite direction had also slowed to almost a stop. The other driver, an older man in what looked like an old Ford pickup, was staring at the same spot where the thing had disappeared. We both pulled over, almost automatically. I think I was in shock. I got out of my car, and he got out of his truck. We were maybe 30 feet apart, standing on opposite sides of the highway. Did you just... I couldn't even finish the sentence. Yeah, he said. Just that one word. His face was pale. What the hell was that? I asked. He shook his head. Never seen anything like it, too big for a man. We both stood there for maybe a minute, looking toward where it had disappeared. Neither of us made any move to go investigate, which seems strange in retrospect, but in the moment it felt dangerous, like something primal in me was saying, stay away. The other driver eventually just got back in his truck without another word and drove off. I wish I'd gotten his information, just to have someone else who could confirm what I saw, because what I saw defies explanation. The creature, and I don't know what else to call it, was covered in hair. Not fur like a bear, but more like hair, blackish brown and shaggy, especially around the shoulders and arms. It wasn't matted or dirty looking, just thick and natural. The hair seemed shorter on the legs, but the chest and back were covered. Its proportions weren't human. The arms were longer than they should have been, hanging down almost to the knees. They swung naturally as it walked, but the swing was exaggerated because of their length. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, easily twice the width of mine, and I'm not a small guy. The chest was barrel-shaped, deep and rounded. If I had to guess its weight, I'd say easily 600 pounds, maybe 700. But despite that bulk, it moved smoothly. There was no lumbering, no awkwardness. It moved like an athlete, efficient, powerful, purposeful. I only got a brief look at its profile, but the face wasn't as hairy as the rest of the body. I couldn't make out clear features, no time for that, but it wasn't a gorilla face. It was flatter, but not human either, something in between. The head seemed to sit directly on the shoulders with little visible neck. After the other driver left, I stayed there for a few more minutes. My hands were shaking. I remember lighting a cigarette. I quit smoking years ago, but back then I still had the habit. And the damn thing trembled between my fingers. I kept staring at the spot where it had crossed, trying to convince myself I'd seen a bear or some guy in a costume. But I knew better. There's no costume that can fake that kind of mass and movement, and no bear moves like that on two legs. Not with that stride length, not with that posture. This thing was upright the entire time, completely comfortable on 2 feet. Its back was straight, not hunched forward like a bear walking on its hind legs. What struck me later, when I was trying to make sense of it all, was that there was a small creek that ran under the highway through a culvert, maybe 50 yards from where I saw the crossing. If this thing was an animal with any normal instincts, it would have used that culvert to cross under the road, unseen. But it didn't. It chose to cross right out in the open, in broad daylight, as if it didn't care about being seen. Or maybe it was in a hurry, or maybe it was just so damn confident in its size and strength that it didn't feel threatened. I finally got back in my car and drove home, going well below the speed limit. I felt lightheaded. When I got home, my wife asked if I was sick because I looked pale. I told her I was just tired. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen for almost a week. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I saw Bigfoot crossing Highway 77. I would have sounded crazy. Hell, I thought maybe I was crazy, but I know what I saw, and the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that I'd encountered something that wasn't supposed to exist. Something that defied the neat categories we put the natural world into. I've heard all the Bigfoot legends over the years, campers hearing strange noises in the Pacific Northwest, blurry photos from California, stories from the deep woods of Washington and Oregon. But Nebraska, in broad daylight, on a highway, it didn't fit any of the patterns from the stories. This wasn't some shadowy figure glimpsed through trees at dusk. This was a clear sighting in good light, on open ground. There was nowhere for something that big to hide, and yet within seconds it had disappeared into that small stand of trees. I went back to the spot a few days later, parking on the shoulder and walking the area. The ditches on both sides were maybe 4 or 5 feet deep, easy for a human to climb in and out of, but not deep enough to hide something that size. The grass was tall in places, but trampled in others. I couldn't tell if the trampling was from the creature or just normal wear. I'm not a tracker by any means. The stand of trees it had headed toward was just a small cluster of cottonwoods and some underbrush. Not a forest, just a windbreak, really. Not dense enough to hide something that size for long. Beyond that was open farmland. Where had it gone? How could something that large just vanish? I checked out the creek and the culvert too. It was maybe 3 feet in diameter, much too small for the creature to crawl through. The creek itself was just a shallow trickle at that time of year, maybe a foot deep in the middle. I've gone back to that spot many times over the years, especially in the first few months after the sighting. Never saw anything unusual again. No tracks, no broken branches, no signs that something massive had passed through. It's like it appeared from nowhere and disappeared back into nowhere. I did eventually tell a few close friends what I'd seen. Some believed me. Some clearly thought I was exaggerating or had seen a bear. One suggested it might have been a guy on stilts in a costume, playing a prank. But who would do that? And how would they move that naturally, that quickly on stilts? I've read about other Bigfoot sightings since then, trying to make sense of what I saw. Some descriptions match what I witnessed: the height, the bulk, the longer arms, the hair color. But most sightings happen in remote areas, in forests, at dusk or night, not on highways in the afternoon. That's what still bothers me the most. It's like this thing didn't follow the rules, not just the rules of what should exist, but the rules of how a large, unrecognized species should behave. It should have been secretive, avoided open areas, avoided humans. Instead, it walked right across a highway in front of two vehicles like it didn't give a damn who saw it. Sometimes I wonder if the other driver ever told anyone what he saw. If he's out there somewhere still thinking about it too. I wonder if anyone would believe either of us. It's been nearly 50 years now since that day. I've never seen anything like it again. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a man, it wasn't any known animal. Whatever crossed Highway 77 that afternoon was something science says doesn't exist, but it does. I saw it with my own eyes, and sometimes, when I'm driving on a lonely stretch of highway in the late afternoon, I find myself scanning the ditches, half hoping, half dreading that I'll see that massive figure step out again, just to prove to myself that I'm not crazy, that for a brief moment on that November day in '74, I glimpsed something impossible. Story 4. I never talk about this much anymore. Most people think I'm crazy or just making it up. But what happened that summer in '73 still haunts me. I was 14 then, spending the summer like I always did in the hills outside Bedford, Indiana, with my cousin Jake and our two friends, Scott and Danny. It was late July, hot as hell, but beautiful in that way only southern Indiana summers can be. The four of us had been camping out at my uncle's property. He had about 30 acres of woods, with a small clearing where we'd set up our tents. The adults stayed in the cabin, about a quarter-mile down the hill. They let us have our wilderness experience, as long as we checked in for meals and didn't do anything stupid. That day started like any other. We woke up early, ate some Pop-Tarts we'd stashed in our tent, and decided to hike up to what we called Top Ridge. It was this perfect overlook spot where you could see for miles across the rolling hills. The climb took about 45 minutes, uphill the whole way through thick forest. We'd been up there dozens of times before. It was our spot. We reached the ridge around 10 in the morning. The humidity was already unbearable, and my t-shirt was sticking to my back from the hike. Jake and Scott were throwing rocks down the hill, seeing who could get one furthest. Danny was looking for arrowheads. He was obsessed with finding Native American artifacts. I just sat on this big flat rock, catching my breath and taking in the view. That's when I heard it. A cow bellowing in the distance, which wasn't unusual. There were farms scattered throughout the area. But something about this sound seemed off. It was more distress than normal. I stood up and walked to the edge of the ridge, trying to spot where it was coming from. "You guys hear that?" I asked. "Yeah, just some stupid cow," Jake said, not even looking up from his rock-throwing competition. I scanned the area below. About 150 yards away, there was a small clearing between patches of woods. The bellowing was coming from somewhere over there. I kept looking, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. In the clearing, walking on two legs, was this thing. It was massive. I mean, taller than any man I'd ever seen. I'd say 7, maybe 8 feet tall. But what really hit me was the color. This thing was covered head to toe in dingy white hair, long and matted in places. It wasn't pure white like snow, more off-white or yellowish white like old wool that hasn't been cleaned. It was walking upright, but not like a person exactly. There was something different about its gait, powerful. Its body was wide and solid, not fat, but incredibly thick and muscular. The arms were longer than a human should be, hanging down past where the knees would be. I couldn't speak for what felt like forever. My mouth went completely dry. Finally, I managed to croak out, Guys, look at that. What the hell is that?" The moment I spoke, the creature stopped dead in its tracks. Then slowly, God, I'll never forget this, It turned its head and upper body in our direction. The movement was so deliberate, so controlled, and then it was staring right at me, right at me. Even from that distance, I could feel its eyes locked onto mine. Dark eyes set in a face I couldn't quite make out clearly, just that it had a flattened nose and was covered in that same white hair. We stared at each other for what must have been only seconds, but felt like an eternity. Jake whispered, "Holy shit." And that seemed to break the spell. The creature turned away from us and started walking again, disappearing into the tree line on the other side of the clearing. Its movements were smooth, purposeful, like it wasn't scared of us at all. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Tell me you saw that." They had. All three of them were standing beside me now, white-faced and silent. Danny was the first to speak. "We need to get the hell out of here," he said. No one argued. We practically flew down that hillside, tripping and sliding the whole way. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that thing was following us. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The woods that had always felt like home now seemed menacing, every shadow potentially hiding that white figure. We made it back to our campsite in record time, all of us talking over each other, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. "It was a bear," Scott said, but his voice wavered. "Had to be." "Bears don't walk on two legs like that," Jake shot back. "Not for that long, and they're not white." "Maybe it was someone in a costume," Danny suggested, but none of us believed that. Who would be out in the middle of nowhere in the stifling July heat wearing a full-body costume? I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes, the intelligence in them, the way it had looked directly at me, like it knew me. There was something ancient in that gaze, something that didn't belong in our world. We debated for hours about what to do. In the end, we decided to tell the adults. My uncle, Jake's dad, was grilling burgers when we approached the cabin. My aunt and Danny's parents were sitting on the porch with beers in their hands. Scott's parents had dropped him off for the week. "Uncle Bill," I started, my voice still shaky. "We saw something up on Top Ridge." He flipped a burger, barely looking up. "Yeah? What's that?" We took turns describing what we'd seen. The white hair, the height, the way it walked, those eyes. As we talked, the adults' expressions changed from mild interest to amusement to barely concealed eye-rolling. "Sounds like you boys have quite an imagination," my aunt said, smiling like we were cute little kids instead of teenagers. "We're not making this up," Jake insisted. "Ask Michael. He saw it first." Uncle Bill put his hand on my shoulder. "Look, son, there's lots of things in these woods. Deer, maybe a bear passing through, even the occasional wildcat, but no giant white monsters. Your eyes played tricks on you, that's all." "But," I started. "No buts," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You probably saw a deer standing on its hind legs to reach some leaves. They do that sometimes. Or maybe it was just the heat getting to you boys." That was it. They'd made up their minds. We were just kids with overactive imaginations who'd gotten spooked in the woods. After dinner, they sent us back to our tents with flashlights and a reminder not to tell scary stories before bed. But we knew what we'd seen. We stayed up late that night, whispering theories. None of us slept much. Every noise outside the tent had us frozen in fear. What if it followed us back? What if it was watching us right now? The next morning, we convinced Uncle Bill to come with us to look for tracks. He humored us, probably thinking it would put an end to our nonsense. We hiked back up to Top Ridge and then down to where we'd seen the creature, but we found nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, no tufts of white hair. The ground was too dry and rocky to hold prints anyway. "See? Nothing here," Uncle Bill said, as if that settled it. For the rest of that trip, we didn't go back to Top Ridge without adults. We stuck close to camp, jumping at shadows. The woods had changed for us. Something sacred had been broken. About a month after we got home, Jake's dad showed us a clipping from a newspaper downstate. The headline read, White creature spotted near Hoosier National Forest. The article described sightings of a tall, upright creature covered in white hair. One witness, a farmer, claimed it had stolen a calf from his property. Uncle Bill laughed it off. "Tabloid nonsense," he said. "People will believe anything." But we knew what we'd seen was real. That was 50 years ago. I'm in my 60s now, with a career in medicine behind me. I've spent my life dealing in facts, in things I can see and measure and test. And yet I've never been able to explain away what I saw that day. I've read about albino animals. I've studied the psychology of group hysteria and false memories. I've even looked into every reported Bigfoot sighting in southern Indiana. Nothing quite matches what we experienced. The thing that stays with me most isn't the size or the white hair or even the way it moved. It's those eyes, the intelligence behind them, the recognition. For those few seconds, it wasn't just looking at me. It was seeing me, acknowledging me, maybe even assessing me. I don't go camping much anymore, can't stand to be in dense woods alone. My wife thinks it's because I'm getting old and soft, preferring hotels to tents. I've never told her the real reason. How do you tell someone that 50 years ago you locked eyes with something that shouldn't exist? Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, that white creature moving silently through the hills of southern Indiana. I wonder if other kids have seen it, told their stories, and been dismissed just like we were. All I know is what I saw. A giant, white-haired being walking on two legs through the woods of Bedford, Indiana, in the summer of '73. Call it Bigfoot, call it a Sasquatch, call it whatever you want. I call it the moment I realized our world is stranger than we can possibly imagine. The worst part. Sometimes I dream about it. In my dreams, it's not walking away. In my dreams, it's coming toward me, those dark eyes fixed on mine, getting closer and closer. And I always wake up just before it reaches me, heart pounding, the smell of those Indiana woods so real I could swear I was 14 again, standing on top ridge, watching something impossible move through the clearing below. Story 5. I've been hesitant to share this for a long time, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm still trying to process what happened that morning in the fall of 2018, and maybe writing it all out will help me make sense of it. I've lived in northern Arkansas my whole life, and I'm no stranger to the outdoors, been hunting, fishing, and working the land since I was a kid. My property is about 80 acres, mostly open pasture for my cattle with some woods in the back and along the creek that runs across the southern end. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happened there until that day. That summer, I'd lost a calf, just disappeared without a trace. No blood, no signs of struggle, nothing. It was weird, but I figured maybe a mountain lion had gotten it clean. We do get them around here occasionally. After that, I started being more vigilant with my morning checks. It was early October, around 7:30 in the morning. The air had that fall crispness to it. Not cold exactly, but that kind of sharpness that wakes you up when you breathe it in. The sun was just getting high enough to cut through the morning mist that was hanging over the pastures. I was on my ATV, making my usual rounds, checking fences and counting heads like I do every morning. When I got to the back pasture that borders the thick patch of woods, the part that eventually connects to national forest land, something felt off. My cattle were all bunched together near the middle of the field, which wasn't normal. They're usually spread out grazing by that time. But what really caught my attention was how they were all facing the same direction, toward the tree line, alert, heads up, completely still. If you've ever worked with cattle, you know that's not normal behavior. I cut the engine on my ATV and just sat there for a minute, watching. That's when I noticed movement in the trees. At first I thought maybe it was a deer, but something about the movement wasn't right. It wasn't darting like a deer would. It was deliberate, smooth, and it was tall, moving upright between the trees. My first thought was a bear, but bears don't move like that either. This thing was walking upright the whole time, not dropping to all fours like a bear would, and it was big, way too big for a person. I reached for my binoculars. I always keep a pair on my ATV, and that's when it stepped into a small clearing between the trees. I swear my heart nearly stopped. What I saw was definitely walking on two legs, but it wasn't human. It was covered in hair, almost black. But when the sunlight hit it directly, there was this reddish tint to it. The thing was massive. I'd estimate at least 7.5 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were incredibly wide, and its arms, God, those arms were unnaturally long, hanging down past its knees. I'm not a small guy. I'm 6'2" and have worked hard labor my whole life, but this thing made me feel tiny just looking at it. Its proportions were all wrong for a human, but it moved with this purpose. That's the only way I can describe it. Not rushed or panicked, but definitely trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree like it knew the landscape. The whole time, it never looked in my direction. I was probably about 200 yards away, sitting still on my ATV, so maybe it didn't notice me, or maybe it did, and just didn't care. Either way, after about 30 seconds of watching it move through that small clearing, it disappeared back into the denser part of the forest. What struck me afterward was the silence. I hadn't noticed it during the encounter because I was so focused on what I was seeing, but the woods were unnaturally quiet. No birds calling, fewer insects than usual, just stillness. It was like everything was holding its breath. I sat there for a good 10 minutes after it disappeared, partly because I was trying to process what I'd just seen, and partly because I wasn't sure if it was coming back. When I finally got my nerves together, I rode over to where I'd seen it cross. I was hoping to find tracks or something, but the ground was too dry and covered with leaves and thick grass. I found a few broken branches about 7 feet up, which seemed odd, but nothing conclusive. When I got back to the house, my wife could tell something was wrong. I'm not usually shaken up, but she said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. When I told her what I'd seen, she didn't laugh or tell me I was crazy like I half expected. Instead, she suggested that maybe this thing was what had taken our calf earlier that summer. It made sense. No blood, no signs of struggle. Something big enough could have just picked it up and walked off with it. The weeks after that encounter were strange. My cattle refused to go anywhere near that section of woods. They're usually drawn to the shade of the trees on hot afternoons, but they stayed in the open field, even on warm days. Animals know things we don't, and they were clearly avoiding that area. About 2 weeks after the sighting, I found something else odd. These large piles of scat near the edge of the woods. I've seen bear scat, coyote, even mountain lion before, but this was different. Too big for any of those animals, and in weird places, not where animals usually do their business. It was like whatever left it was marking territory. Then in late October, maybe 3 weeks after my sighting, I heard it. I was in the barn around dusk, finishing up some repairs, when this sound came from the direction of those woods. It's hard to describe, like a mix between a man yelling and a wolf howling. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was loud enough that my wife heard it from the house and called me to ask what it was. I told her I didn't know, but I think we both knew. Winter came and things quieted down. I didn't see anything unusual for months. Then in the spring, after a heavy rain, I found a footprint near the creek. The ground was soft mud, and there it was, a single massive footprint. It was about 16 inches long and 7 inches wide, with clear toes. No claw marks like you'd see with a bear, just a huge human-like foot, but way too big to be human. I took pictures with my phone, but by the time I came back with a tape measure and a plaster kit I'd ordered online months before, just in case, it had rained again and the print was washed out. The pictures didn't come out great either, just looks like a blob in the mud unless you know what you're looking at. I haven't seen the creature since that first encounter, but I don't go to the back part of my property unarmed anymore. Not that I think I'd use a gun. I don't believe this thing means any harm. It seemed like it was just passing through, not trying to avoid being seen, but having protection gives me peace of mind. Some nights I still think about what I saw. Was it really what people call Bigfoot? I've never been one for cryptids or conspiracy theories. I'm a practical person, but I know what I saw wasn't a bear or a man in a suit or any animal that's supposed to exist in these woods. The strangest part is that I don't feel threatened by the memory. There was something almost deliberate about the way it moved, like it was intelligent, aware. If it wanted to hurt me or my animals, it could have. Instead, it just wanted to pass through unnoticed. My wife thinks it might have a territory that overlaps with our land, using the creek as a corridor. That would explain why we occasionally find those strange scat piles or broken branches high up in the trees. I've set up trail cameras in a few spots, but so far nothing unusual has shown up on them. Last month, I was talking to a neighbor who lives about 5 miles down the road. He mentioned that back in 2018, he had 2 goats disappear without a trace. No blood, no signs of struggle, just gone. He blamed coyotes, but I wonder. I still do my morning rounds every day, still check the cattle, fix fences, and keep an eye on things. But now I pay more attention to the sounds of the forest. I notice when the birds go quiet, or when my cattle all look in the same direction. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched when I'm near those backwoods, but I never see anything. I don't know what to make of my experience. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I just know what I saw that morning changed how I look at these woods, at all wild places really. There are things out there we don't understand, moving through the world alongside us, just trying to stay hidden. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, watching from the trees, waiting for me to leave so it can cross the pasture unseen. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is still, I think I hear that strange howl in the distance, not quite human, not quite animal, reminding me that there are mysteries in these woods that might never be explained. Story 6. I can't get this out of my head, even though it's been almost 2 weeks since it happened. I've barely slept. I keep seeing those eyes when I close mine. Writing this down might help, but I doubt it. My cousin William and I had been planning our hunting trip for months. We'd saved up for new ammunition and supplies, and October 18th was supposed to be the start of our big adventure. We're both 19, been hunting since we were boys, but nothing could have prepared us for what happened in those mountains. The weather that morning was perfect for hunting. Crisp autumn air, slight breeze, clear skies. The green mountains were showing off their fall colors, all those reds and oranges. We'd headed south of Williamston in Orange County, an area folks said was good for deer, but not many hunters ventured there. Now I understand why. We'd been tracking what we thought was a decent-sized buck for about 3 hours. The sun was high overhead, and we were getting hungry, but William insisted we press on. "Just a little further, Thomas," he kept saying. "The tracks are fresh." I remember being annoyed because my canteen was nearly empty and my boots were rubbing a blister on my right heel. But I followed him anyway. The terrain got rougher as we moved deeper into the mountains. We had to navigate around massive boulders and through dense patches of undergrowth. The forest was unusually quiet. I realize that now. No birdsong, no squirrels chattering, just the sound of our boots crunching on fallen leaves and our labored breathing as we climbed. We reached a small clearing surrounded by rock formations. William motioned for me to stop and pointed at some disturbed earth near a fallen log. Fresh tracks, but they didn't look quite right for deer. They were too broad, with what looked like 5 distinct toe marks. I remember feeling a chill despite the midday warmth. "What made those?" I whispered. William shook his head. "Bear, maybe. Big one." We both readied our rifles and moved forward more cautiously. The clearing narrowed into a path between 2 rocky cliffs, and we had to proceed single file. William went first. I was about 10 feet behind him when it happened. The thing sprang out from behind an outcropping on the right cliff face. It moved so fast that at first all I registered was a blur of reddish color and a terrible smell, like wet animal fur mixed with something rotting. William stumbled backward into me, and we both nearly fell. When I steadied myself and looked up, I saw it clearly for the first time. Standing not 30 feet away was what I can only describe as a wild man, though that doesn't capture the wrongness of it. It stood about 5 feet tall, completely covered in bright red hair that wasn't like any animal I've ever seen. More like rusted metal than fur, catching the sunlight in an unnatural way. Its face was partially obscured by a matted, straggling beard, but what struck me most were its eyes. They were wide and intensely focused, too intelligent for an animal, but too wild for a human. They seemed to glow from within, though that might have been a trick of the light, for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. None of us moved. The creature's chest heaved with rapid breaths. Its hands, and they were hands, not paws, hung at its sides. Fingers splayed. The nails were long and dark. William was the first to break the silence. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered. At the sound of his voice, the creature's head snapped toward him. It made a low, rumbling sound in its throat, and then suddenly spun around and started loping toward the woods on the other side of the clearing. William raised his rifle. I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I started to say, but he shook me off. "It's a bear," he insisted, though his voice trembled. "Just a strange-looking bear." He fired. The shot echoed through the mountains, and the creature stumbled mid-stride. For a heartbeat, I thought William had killed it. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a high, piercing shriek that was neither animal nor human, but somehow both. It was a sound of pain, yes, but more than that, it was rage. The creature whirled around, and I swear its eyes had changed. Before they were wild, but almost curious. Now they burned with hatred. It dropped to all fours and charged toward us with incredible speed. William fired again, but missed. I raised my own rifle, but couldn't steady my hands enough to aim. The creature was closing the distance so quickly that shooting seemed pointless anyway. "Run!" I screamed, and we both turned and fled back the way we'd come. I've never run so fast in my life. The path was treacherous, roots to trip over, rocks to slip on, but fear pushed us forward. I could hear the creature behind us, crashing through undergrowth. Sometimes so close, I could feel its hot breath on my neck, or maybe that was just my imagination. I was too terrified to look back. William was slightly ahead of me when his foot caught on a root. He went down hard, his rifle flying from his grasp. He skidded to a stop and grabbed his arm to haul him up. In that moment, I glanced back and saw the creature just yards away, its red hair bristling, mouth open to reveal yellowed teeth. I yanked William to his feet, but he cried out in pain. "My ankle!" he gasped. I threw his arm over my shoulder, and we hobbled forward as fast as we could. My own rifle was hampering our movement, so I dropped it. The ammunition pouch at my belt caught on a branch and tore away. None of it mattered. We just needed to escape. We came to a steep slope and had no choice but to descend it. We half ran, half slid down, grabbing at saplings to slow our descent. Somewhere in that chaotic scramble, we lost the creature. Perhaps it couldn't navigate the slope as quickly, or maybe it was injured from William's shot. I don't know. I just remember the sudden absence of that crashing sound behind us, though the terrifying shrieks continued to echo through the forest. We didn't stop running. We crashed through streams, scrambled over fallen trees, pushed through thickets that tore at our clothes and skin. My lungs burned, and William's face was ghostly pale from the pain in his ankle, but we kept moving. It was nearly dusk when we finally reached the edge of the forest, stumbling onto the road about 3 miles from where we'd left our horses tied. We collapsed there, gasping for breath, unable to speak. A farmer passing by in his wagon found us, and, seeing our condition, took us to his home where his wife tended to William's sprained ankle. They asked what had happened, but we couldn't bring ourselves to tell the truth. Who would believe us? We mumbled something about a bear, and they nodded sympathetically, assuming we were just inexperienced young hunters who'd gotten a scare. The next day, the farmer drove us to retrieve our horses. We didn't go back into the forest, just waited by the road while he fetched them from where we'd left them. He asked about our guns, and we said we'd come back for them another day. That was a lie. Neither of us ever wanted to set foot in those woods again. In the 2 weeks since, I've tried to make sense of what we saw. I've looked through books, asked discreet questions about strange creatures in the Green Mountains. Some old-timers have stories about wild men living in the most remote areas, but they tell these tales with a wink and a nudge, clearly thinking them to be nothing more than backwoods legends. William and I have talked about it only once. 3 days after it happened, he came to my house late at night. He was drinking heavily, which isn't like him. "It wasn't a bear," he said. "I know," I replied. "What was it then?" I couldn't answer him. I still can't. Sometimes I wonder if William's shot killed it. I doubt it. The wound seemed to only enrage it, not slow it down. It's still out there, I'm certain, roaming those mountains with its hatred for humans now justified. I've had nightmares every night. In them, I'm running through endless forest, the creature always just behind me. Sometimes I look back and see not just one, but dozens of them, all with that same red hair and those burning eyes. I wake up sweating and shaking, unable to fall back asleep. William's ankle is healing, but something in him seems broken. He doesn't laugh anymore. He's sold his hunting gear and taken a job at the sawmill, saying he prefers to stay close to town now. As for me, I've decided to leave Vermont entirely. My uncle has offered me work at his store in Boston, and I'm taking it. I need streets and buildings and crowds of normal people around me. I need to be somewhere where the forests don't press in so close, where every shadow doesn't make me think of that creature's silhouette. I know what we saw was real. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a wolf, wasn't any animal I've ever encountered or read about. It wasn't a man either, though it walked on 2 legs and had hands that could grasp. It was something in between, something that shouldn't exist, but does. I find myself thinking about its eyes the most. There was intelligence there, and hatred, yes, but also something else. Recognition, maybe, like it knew what we were and had encountered our kind before. That's what frightens me most of all. The thought that it's been watching humans from those woods for years, learning about us, hating us. I've left out something I haven't even told William. When the creature screamed after being shot, I thought I heard words in that howl. Not clear ones, nothing I could repeat, but there was a pattern to the sound that felt like language. The idea that it might be able to communicate, might be able to think and plan, and remember those who harmed it. That keeps me awake at night more than anything else. I'm leaving tomorrow. I've packed only what I need and told my parents I just want a fresh start in the city. They seem relieved, actually. I think they've noticed the change in me, the way I flinch at unexpected noises and stare too long at the tree line behind our house. Before I go, I needed to write this down. Not because I expect anyone to believe me, but because I need to acknowledge what happened. It was real. We saw it. It chased us, and somewhere in those mountains, with its bright red hair and its 2 human eyes, it's still there, waiting. I'll never go back to find out. Story 7. I've spent over 50 years trying to make sense of what I saw that day in the Sierra National Forest. I'm not a man who scares easily, but this experience shook me to my core. I've only shared this with close family members until now, but after seeing similar accounts online, I feel compelled to finally put this down in writing. It was early November 1963. I was 27 years old at the time, an experienced hunter who'd been tracking deer since I was a boy. My uncle Frank, cousin Bill and I had driven up to the Sierra National Forest for our annual hunting trip. We'd been planning it for months, checking our gear, talking strategy, the usual preparations. We arrived at our campsite the evening before, set up our tents, and spent the night telling stories around the campfire. The plan was to split up before dawn, and meet back at camp by late afternoon. I remember the excitement I felt that night, unable to sleep well because I was so eager to get out there at first light. I woke up around 4 in the morning. It was pitch black and cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I layered up thermal underwear, flannel shirt, wool pants, and my dad's old hunting jacket that I'd inherited. I grabbed my Winchester .306, some jerky, a canteen of water, and my buck scent. Uncle Frank and Bill were already up making coffee over the small propane stove. "Good hunting," Uncle Frank whispered as we headed out in different directions. I can still hear those words in my head. I hiked about 2 miles northeast of our camp. The terrain was challenging, lots of elevation changes, fallen logs, and dense patches of forest broken up by small clearings. I found a perfect spot among some fallen timber that gave me clear sightlines to a small meadow. There was a game trail nearby, and the wind direction was perfect for my position. The sun wasn't up yet, just the faintest glow on the horizon. I settled in, applied some buck scent around my position and waited. The forest was eerily quiet that morning. No birds singing, just the occasional rustle of branches in the light breeze. I remember thinking it was strange, but figured maybe a predator had passed through recently. Around 7:30, I spotted movement. 2 young bucks, probably 2-year-olds, were cautiously making their way along the trail. My scent had worked perfectly. They came within 30 yards of my position. I could have easily taken a shot, but neither was the trophy I was hoping for, so I let them pass. Just watching them, so alert and graceful, was reward enough. Over the next few hours, I saw a few more deer moving through the area. The day warmed up slightly, and I removed my heavy jacket. By early afternoon, around 1 o'clock, the forest had gone quiet again. No movement, no deer. I'd been sitting in the same position for hours, and fatigue was setting in. I decided to take a short nap. This wasn't unusual for me on hunting trips. A quick 20-minute rest to recharge. I leaned back against a large fallen pine, keeping my rifle across my lap, and closed my eyes. I don't know exactly how long I slept. It might have been 15 minutes or closer to an hour. What woke me wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. You know that sensation when someone is staring at you? That prickly feeling on the back of your neck. That's what jarred me awake. My eyes snapped open, but I didn't move. Years of hunting had taught me to wake up alert, but still. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Slowly, carefully, I tightened my grip on my rifle and sat up straighter. That's when I saw it. About 10 feet away, a large figure was silently striding away from me. My first thought was, that's a person. But within seconds, I knew that wasn't right. This thing was covered in thick, grayish-black hair. Not like a bear. I'd seen plenty of bears. This was different. It walked upright on 2 legs with a smooth, fluid motion that no bear could manage. "Hey," I called out, thinking maybe it was another hunter in some kind of ghillie suit. The figure never broke stride or acknowledged me in any way. It just kept moving away with a purposeful gait. What struck me most was the silence. The forest floor was covered with dry pine needles, twigs, and branches. Anyone, any human, walking through would make crackling sounds. This thing moved without making a sound, like it was floating just above the ground. I stood up, still clutching my rifle. The creature, I don't know what else to call it, was about 6 feet 6 inches tall, maybe taller. Its body was muscular, not bulky like a bear, but defined like those bodybuilders you'd see at Muscle Beach. The proportions were all wrong for a human, though. The arms hung lower and the shoulders were massive compared to the waist, but the head, that's what I remember most clearly. It wasn't round like a human head. It had a distinctive point at the back, almost conical. I couldn't see its face from my angle, but the skin on the back of its head appeared to be the same dark color as the hair covering its body. Within seconds, it disappeared into the thick forest undergrowth. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two. My mouth was dry and my hands were shaking so badly I had to consciously tighten my grip on my rifle. Should I follow it? Should I call out again? My mind was racing with questions and possibilities. I've spent my whole life in the outdoors and know what animals are native to the Sierras. This wasn't a bear, wasn't a moose, wasn't anything I could identify. I decided to track it, partly out of curiosity and partly because I needed to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. I moved cautiously in the direction it had gone, expecting to find footprints or broken branches, some evidence of its passage. There was nothing. No tracks in the soft earth, no disturbed vegetation. It was as if this massive creature had passed through without touching anything. I searched for about 30 minutes, moving in widening circles from where I'd last seen it. Nothing. The forest had swallowed it completely. The only evidence I had was my own memory, and even that was starting to feel dreamlike. By this point, it was late afternoon, and I needed to head back to camp. The entire hike back, I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling watched from every direction. The forest that had always been my sanctuary now felt alien and threatening. When I reached camp, Uncle Frank and Bill were already there, cleaning a 4-point buck Bill had shot. They were in high spirits, laughing and recounting the day's hunt. I must have looked pale, because Frank immediately asked if I was okay. I hesitated. How could I possibly explain what I'd seen? They'd think I was crazy, or that I'd fallen asleep and had a vivid dream. So I lied. Said I wasn't feeling well, maybe coming down with something. We ate dinner in silence, at least on my part. I couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my mind. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside our tent had me reaching for my rifle. I kept seeing that pointed head, that fluid, silent movement. By morning, I'd convinced myself that maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe the fatigue, the quietness of the forest, and the isolation had played tricks on my mind. We packed up and headed home the next day. I never told Frank or Bill what happened. I didn't tell anyone for years. What was the point? Without evidence, it was just a strange story. Fast forward to 1967. I was sitting in my living room watching the evening news when they showed this film taken by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. There, walking across a creek bed in Northern California, was something that looked eerily similar to what I'd seen that day in the Sierra National Forest. The same fluid movement, the same proportions, the same pointed head. I've spent decades trying to rationalize what I saw. Was it a bear walking upright? No, the movement was all wrong. Was it another hunter in some kind of suit? No hunter moves that silently through dense forest. Was it a hallucination? I wasn't on any medication, hadn't been drinking, and have never experienced hallucinations before or since. The thing that bothers me most after all these years isn't the creature itself. It's the feeling that it knew I was there the whole time, that it had been watching me sleep and decided to leave just as I was waking up. The feeling that our encounter wasn't random but somehow deliberate. I'm 77 years old now. I've never gone back to that specific area of the Sierra National Forest. I continued hunting for many years after, but always with others, never alone, and I always felt uneasy in the woods, always felt watched. I don't expect anyone to believe my story. Hell, sometimes I'm not sure I believe it myself. But I know what I saw that November afternoon in 1963. It wasn't human. It wasn't any known animal. And it moved with an intelligence and purpose that still haunts me today. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving silently through the forest, watching hunters as they sleep, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I can't sleep, I wonder if it remembers me too. Story 8. I still can't fully process what happened that day. January 9th, 2015. The date is burned into my memory. I've gone over it 1,000 times trying to convince myself I was seeing things, but I know what I saw. I live with my family in Canyon Lake, Texas. It was a Friday evening, about 5:30, and we were heading out to grab dinner in town. The weather was miserable, cold, misty, that kind of damp chill that gets into your bones. The kind of evening where you just want to be inside, you know? We were backing out of our driveway, which is pretty long since we live in a more secluded area near the lake. I had my high beams on because of the mist, and that's when I saw it, about 40 yards away, standing next to this big oak tree we have on our property. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was massive. I'm not exaggerating when I say this thing had to be at least 9 feet tall. My headlights caught it perfectly, illuminating this grayish blonde being. I don't even know what to call it. Not a person. Not an animal I've ever seen. The shoulders on this thing were enormous. I'd guess 4 to 4.5 feet across, like a linebacker on steroids, but way bigger. I remember how defined the muscles looked, even from that distance. The way it was just standing there, watching us. The weirdest part was its head. It was oval-shaped, and there wasn't really a visible neck. It was like the head just sat directly on those massive shoulders. I blinked, just for a second, looked at my wife to see if she was seeing this too, but she was looking down at her phone. When I looked back, not even 2 seconds later, it was gone, just vanished. Something that big shouldn't be able to move that quickly or quietly. I didn't say anything to my family right then. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I just saw a 9-foot-tall monster in our yard. They'd think I was losing it, so I kept driving, but I couldn't focus on anything during dinner. My wife kept asking if I was feeling okay. I spent that whole night looking out the windows, checking the locks, listening for I don't know what. Footsteps, breaking branches. I kept the shotgun by the bed, which I never do. I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, I walked around our property looking for footprints or any sign of what I'd seen. Nothing. No broken branches, no disturbed earth. Nothing. I started to think maybe it had been a trick of the light or my imagination working overtime. But then the following Friday changed everything. My wife and stepdaughter went for a walk along the shoreline of Canyon Lake, not far from our property. They came running back, both white as sheets. They'd found a deer carcass, but not like any they'd seen before. I grabbed my phone and went to check it out. What I saw still makes my stomach turn. The deer's neck was broken and twisted completely around, almost a full 360 degrees. That takes incredible strength, but the really disturbing part was that the organs were missing. Something had consumed parts of it. There were precise cuts, not like what you'd see from normal predators. This wasn't a mountain lion kill. This wasn't normal. I took some pictures and decided to contact the BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization. Look, I know how that sounds. Before all this, I would have laughed at anyone talking about Bigfoot, but what I saw wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I recognized. An investigator named JD came out the next day. Professional guy, didn't make me feel crazy for calling. We went to the deer site, and he documented everything methodically. He found things I'd missed, like this sharp-edged stone that had flesh and blood underneath the deer's hide, like it had been used as a tool. There was a blood streak about 10 feet long, showing how the deer had been dragged. And from the way the ground was disturbed, JD said it looked like the deer had been thrown about 15 feet. Thrown. A full-grown deer. Then we found this 5-foot stick nearby with deer hair and flesh stuck to one sharpened end. JD suggested it might have been used to stab or hold down the deer while whatever it was did its work. The most convincing evidence was the tracks. Multiple sets. The largest ones were 19 inches long. The others were smaller, 14 inches and 11 inches. A family group, JD said. The ground was too hard to make casts, but we documented them with photos and measurements. Over the next few days, we found 5 more deer carcasses in the area, all with similar injuries, all with missing organs, all killed with what seemed like intelligence and purpose. JD interviewed me about what I'd seen that night in the headlights. I described the height, around 9 feet, the massive shoulders, the defined muscles, the oval head with no visible neck, the grayish-blonde coloring. He nodded, like he'd heard it all before. I've installed security cameras all around our property now. My wife thinks I'm paranoid, but she didn't see what I saw. That image is burned into my brain. Those few seconds where the headlights illuminated something that shouldn't exist. The worst part is the feeling that it's still out there, that it's watching us. Sometimes at night, I hear branches breaking in the distance, too heavy to be deer or normal wildlife. Sometimes I find unusual arrangements of sticks on our property that weren't there the day before. I check the cameras obsessively, but I've never caught anything on film. It's like this thing knows where the cameras are and avoids them. The intelligence that suggests is almost more terrifying than its size. Our neighbors think we're crazy. When I tried to tell our closest neighbor about what happened, he laughed and suggested I cut back on the horror movies. But I notice he installed new security lights the following week. I've started carrying whenever I go outside, especially at dusk. My stepdaughter won't walk to the bus stop alone anymore. My wife says she sometimes feels like she's being watched when she's out gardening. The investigators from BFRO have been back several times. They've set up recording equipment, left bait, tried various techniques to get evidence. Nothing conclusive yet, but they've recorded some strange vocalizations at night that they can't identify. Wood knocks that follow patterns, signs of intelligence. The rational part of my brain still tries to find explanations. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs. Though we don't have bears this size in this part of Texas. Maybe the deer was killed by coyotes, though coyotes don't break necks with that kind of precision or remove organs. Maybe the footprints were hoaxes, though who would do that on my private property? But I know what I saw. I know it was real. I've since connected with others in the area who've had similar experiences. A guy 5 miles down the shore saw something similar crossing the road late one night. A woman on the other side of the lake found strange structures made of branches that appeared overnight on her property. A hunter found his deer blind, completely destroyed, twisted apart like it was made of paper. The worst thing is not knowing, not having answers, wondering if it's going to come back, wondering what it wants. Every time I back out of my driveway now, I scan those trees. Every time I hear a noise at night, I'm wide awake. Every time my stepdaughter is late coming home from a friend's house, my heart races until I see her. The fear doesn't go away. It just becomes part of your life. You learn to live with it, but it changes you. I've never gone public with this until now. The ridicule isn't worth it. But I know what I saw that misty evening in January. I know what twisted that deer's neck and removed its organs with almost surgical precision. I know what made those 19-inch footprints. I just don't know what to call it. I don't know why it's here or what it wants, and I don't know when I'll see it again, but I'm certain that I will. Last night, I heard something heavy moving around outside our house, something that made the dog go completely silent, not barking, not whimpering, just frozen with fear. I grabbed my shotgun and flashlight, but by the time I worked up the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. Nothing except for a freshly killed rabbit placed on our front step. Its neck was broken and twisted completely around. Story 9. I still can't sleep right when I think about what happened last month. My hands are shaking even as I type this, but I need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can make sense of it, because I sure as hell can't. Me and 3 of my buddies, Jake, Mike, and Chris, we've been friends since college and try to do at least 1 camping trip a year. We're all pushing 30 now with jobs and responsibilities, so these trips are our chance to blow off steam. This year, Mike suggested exploring this abandoned gold mine he'd heard about in a remote canyon in southern Oregon. We're all into that urban exploration stuff, so it sounded perfect. We drove out there on a Friday morning in 2 trucks loaded with our camping gear. The Forest Service road got rougher the further we went, eventually turning into this narrow dirt path that had our trucks bottoming out in spots. We finally reached a point where we couldn't drive any further, so we parked and hiked the last couple miles with all our stuff. The hike in was harder than expected. The trail wasn't maintained at all, and we had to push through thick underbrush in some places. By the time we reached the canyon where the mine was supposed to be, we were all sweaty and irritable. But the sight of the old mine entrance built into the rocky hillside made it worth it. It was smaller than I expected, just a dark opening with some rotting timber supports, but definitely the real deal. We found a flat area about 100 yards from the mine entrance to set up camp. There was a clearing near the tree line that seemed perfect. We pitched our 2 tents, gathered stones to make a fire ring, and got everything organized. It was about 4 in the afternoon by then, and I remember Jake saying something felt off about the place. At first, I didn't know what he meant, but then it hit me. The silence. It was completely unnaturally quiet. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling around, no wind in the trees. Nothing. Just dead silence. I've been camping dozens of times and I've never experienced anything like it. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. Chris laughed it off, saying we'd probably scared everything away with our noisy approach. That made sense, so we tried to ignore the weird feeling and focus on having a good time. We explored around the mine entrance a bit, though we didn't go too far in without proper gear. The sun was starting to set, so we headed back to camp to get a fire going. We cooked some burgers on the portable grill, cracked open some beers, and started sharing stories around the fire. Normal camping stuff, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the trees. Every few minutes, I'd catch myself staring into the darkness beyond our campfire, trying to make out shapes in the shadows. The others must have felt it too, because conversation kept dying off into uncomfortable silences where we'd all just listen to the crackling fire. We finally turned in around midnight. Mike and I shared one tent while Jake and Chris took the other. I fell asleep pretty quickly, exhausted from the hike and a few too many beers. I don't know exactly what time it was when Mike shook me awake. Maybe around 1 in the morning. He was whispering urgently, "Did you hear that?" Before I could answer, I heard it too. Something moving through the underbrush behind our tent. Heavy footsteps, breaking branches, way too big to be a raccoon or fox. My first thought was bear, which was scary enough. Then we heard this sound that made my blood run cold. A long, low groan that didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard. It was almost human, but deeper, more guttural. Mike and I froze, not daring to move or speak. That's when the first scream came from the ridge above the mine shaft. Jesus Christ, that sound. It was like a howl and a roar mixed together, impossibly loud and filled with this primal rage that made every hair on my body stand up. It echoed around the canyon walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. We scrambled out of our tent, grabbing our flashlights. Jake and Chris were already outside, looking terrified. Chris had his hunting knife in his hand, though what good that would do against whatever made that sound, I don't know. "What the fuck was that?" Jake kept saying, swinging his flashlight wildly toward the ridge. Before anyone could answer, another scream cut through the night, this one from a different direction, somewhere to our left, deeper in the woods. And then, most terrifying of all, something answered from behind us. 3 different positions, 3 different things. "We need to get the fire built up," Mike said, his voice shaking. We all rushed to throw more wood on the dying embers, desperate for light and the psychological comfort of the flames. That's when we heard the deep, rumbling bellow from behind an old ore cart about 30 feet from our camp. It was so close that we all spun around, illuminating the rusty cart with our flashlights, but seeing nothing behind it. Just as we turned back to the fire, something heavy crashed through the underbrush right at the edge of our camp. Then came the first rock, a fist-sized stone that sailed out of the darkness and landed with a thud right in the middle of our camp. "What the fuck is happening?" Chris yelled, his voice cracking with panic. For the next several hours, though it felt like days, we experienced what I can only describe as a siege. Multiple creatures circled our camp, communicating with each other through those horrifying screams and grunts. They'd rush through the underbrush just out of the light of our fire, creating this terrifying illusion that they were about to charge into our camp at any moment. More rocks were thrown, some small, some the size of bowling balls that could have seriously injured us if they'd hit. We stood back to back around the fire, flashlights pointed outward, catching occasional glimpses of movement in the trees, a massive shadow here, a branch snapping there, but never a clear view of what was stalking us. Around 3 in the morning, things escalated. Something hit Jake and Chris's tent with tremendous force, knocking it flat and tearing the fabric. We heard whatever it was retreat back into the woods with heavy, pounding footsteps. "We need to make a run for the trucks," Chris suggested, his voice barely a whisper. "No way," Mike responded immediately. "They'd catch us in the dark before we made it half a mile. We need to wait for daylight." He was right. Whatever was out there was faster than us, knew the terrain better, and could see in the dark. Our only chance was to maintain the fire and stick together until dawn. Around 4 in the morning, I experienced the moment that still gives me nightmares. I was scanning the edge of camp with my flashlight when the beam caught a pair of eyes reflecting back at me from about 50 feet away. Not like a deer or raccoon's eyes, these were set apart, at human height, but higher. Maybe 7 feet off the ground. As I held the light there, frozen in terror, I could make out the vague shape of a massive, hair-covered figure with long arms, standing upright at the edge of the trees. It held my gaze for several seconds before stepping backward into the darkness, disappearing completely. "I saw one," I whispered to the others, my voice barely working. It was huge, standing like a man, but not a man. Jake grabbed my shoulder hard enough to hurt. "There's more than one. They're working together. They've been taking turns, keeping us surrounded." That realization made the situation even more terrifying. This wasn't a random animal encounter. It was coordinated, intelligent, deliberate. The attacks continued until the first light of dawn began to show over the canyon rim. As the sky lightened, the forest gradually fell silent again. We waited a full hour after sunrise before anyone dared to lower their guard. The scene in daylight was surreal. Our camp was a disaster. One tent completely destroyed, rocks scattered everywhere, our gear strewn about. Upon closer inspection of the damaged tent, we found what looked like claw marks along one side. 4 parallel tears through the heavy canvas, spaced about 4 inches apart. Near our backpacks, which we'd left leaning against a log, several large rocks had been carefully placed in a line, not thrown, placed, like some kind of message or warning. We packed up in record time, barely speaking to each other. The hike out was a blur of paranoia, all of us constantly looking over our shoulders and jumping at every sound. When we finally reached the trucks, I don't think I've ever felt such relief. We've tried to make sense of what happened that night. Bears don't throw rocks or work in coordinated groups. Mountain lions don't scream like that or stand on 2 legs. The strategic nature of the attack, the circling, the communication between multiple creatures, the escalating intimidation tactics, points to something with intelligence and purpose. I've never believed in Sasquatch before this. Honestly, I'm still not sure what to believe, but I know what we experienced wasn't normal wildlife behavior. Something intelligent and territorial wanted us out of that canyon. Something that could think, plan, and coordinate with others of its kind. I haven't been camping since, and I don't know if I ever will again. Sometimes at night, I still hear those screams in my dreams, and sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I get the feeling I'm being watched through the windows, even though I live on the 3rd floor. Whatever was in those woods that night I'm convinced it wasn't just passing through, it was defending its territory, and sometimes I wonder if one of them followed us out. Story 10. To the power of I've been debating whether to share this for years. I'm not the type who believes in monsters or goes looking for cryptids. I'm a practical guy, an electrician from Winnipeg who enjoys fishing, hockey, and occasional hiking with my son. What happened that day in August of 2014 has been eating at me, though. I need to get it off my chest. My son Mark and I had planned this father-son hiking trip to Whiteshell Provincial Park for months. Mark was 26 at the time, living a few hours away in Brandon with his girlfriend, so we didn't get to spend as much time together as I would have liked. The trip was supposed to be about reconnecting, maybe catching some walleye, and enjoying the last bits of summer before the Manitoba winter set in. We arrived at the park around 9 in the morning. The weather was perfect, not too hot, maybe around 18 degrees, with a light breeze rustling through the jack pines. We'd chosen one of the less popular trails because I wanted some peace and quiet. I remember feeling genuinely happy that morning, breathing in that crisp, pine-scented air as we started our hike. About 2 hours in, we stopped for a water break. Mark was telling me about his new job, and I suggested we explore a bit off the main trail. There was a small clearing I could see through the trees that looked interesting, maybe a good spot for lunch later. I'm going to check out that clearing, I told Mark, pointing toward it. Looks like it might open up to a view. Mark nodded, still fiddling with his backpack. I'll catch up in a minute, just adjusting my boot. I headed off, pushing through some underbrush. The main trail was still visible behind me, maybe 50 yards back, with Mark's blue shirt a reassuring splash of color through the trees. The ground was uneven, with exposed roots and scattered rocks. I remember being careful with my footing, not wanting to twist an ankle out here. As I approached the clearing, something caught my eye. About 30 yards ahead was an old stone wall, maybe 2 feet tall, the kind left behind by early settlers. It was half crumbled, covered with lichen and moss. But that's not what grabbed my attention. There was movement behind the wall. My first thought was bear. We'd been warned at the trailhead that black bears were active in the area. I froze, my heart immediately picking up speed. I'm not ashamed to admit I'm scared of bears. I've had a healthy fear of them ever since a camping trip gone wrong in my 20s. I squinted, trying to make out the dark shape crouched behind the wall. It was partially obscured, but I could see what looked like a black, furry back. I slowly reached for my bear spray, trying not to make any sudden movements. That's when it happened. The figure stood up. In that instant, I knew I wasn't looking at a bear. Bears don't stand up straight like that. This thing was upright, bipedal, and decidedly not a bear, not a moose, not a person in a coat, not anything I recognized. It was covered in black hair, not fur, but hair from head to toe. It stood about 5 feet tall, much shorter than I expected, with a slim build. But what struck me most were its arms. They were unnaturally long, hanging down almost to its knees. Its head was strange too, cone-shaped and sitting directly on its shoulders, like it didn't have a neck at all. For a moment, couldn't have been more than 3 seconds, we just stared at each other. I couldn't see its face clearly through the hair, but I felt it watching me. My mouth went completely dry. I couldn't move, couldn't think. It was like my brain short-circuited trying to process what I was seeing. Then it moved. God, the way it moved. Despite having shorter legs than a human, it shot off with incredible speed, darting away from the wall and into the denser forest beyond the clearing. It didn't lumber or gallop like a bear. It ran upright, arms swinging at its sides with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for its proportions. I found my voice and shouted for Mark. "Mark, get over here, quick!" My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. Higher, tighter. I heard him crashing through the underbrush behind me. "Dad, what's wrong? You okay?" I couldn't take my eyes off the spot where the creature had disappeared. "Did you see that?" I asked, my hand shaking as I pointed. "See what?" Mark was next to me now, scanning the area with concerned eyes. There was something... I struggled to find the words. It wasn't a bear. It was standing upright, covered in black hair. Mark looked at me skeptically. "Like a person." "No." I shook my head firmly. "Not a person. It had these arms. Long arms, and its head was shaped weird. No neck. It ran off into those trees." As I was explaining, we both heard it, the sound of something moving through the forest ahead of us. Branches crunching, twigs snapping. It wasn't the subtle sounds of a squirrel or bird. These were heavy, deliberate movements. Mark's expression changed. He heard it too. "What the hell is that?" The rational part of my brain was offering explanations. Maybe a deer, maybe a bear after all. But I knew what I'd seen. "I think it was a Sasquatch," I said, the word feeling ridiculous coming out of my mouth. I'd never believed in such things before. I'd laughed at those blurry footage shows on TV. "Are you serious?" Mark didn't look like he was laughing, though. The sounds continued, moving away from us at a steady pace. Something came over me then, a mixture of curiosity and adrenaline. "Let's follow it," I said. "Dad, if that's a bear..." "It's not a bear," I insisted. "Bears don't move like that. Come on, we still have the bear spray if it is." Against his better judgment, Mark followed me. We moved cautiously toward the stone wall, then beyond it, following the sounds of movement ahead. The forest grew denser here, with fallen logs and thick underbrush making progress difficult. The ground was hard and dry, covered with a thick carpet of pine needles that cushioned our steps. We followed those sounds for nearly 3 hours. Sometimes they'd fade, and we'd stop, listening intently until we picked them up again. We moved in wide loops, backtracking occasionally when we lost the trail. Mark kept asking me to describe exactly what I'd seen, and I repeated the details over and over. The black hair, the long arms, the cone-shaped head with no neck, the speed of its movement. "If it's what you think it is, why isn't it bigger?" Mark asked as we paused to catch our breath. "Aren't they supposed to be like 8 feet tall?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe it was young. It was definitely shorter than me, but those proportions weren't human." The temperature was dropping as afternoon wore on. A light fog had started rolling in between the trees, giving the forest an eerie quality. The sounds had stopped about 20 minutes earlier, and we were standing in a small ravine, unsure which way to go. "We should head back," Mark said, checking his watch. "It'll be getting dark in a couple hours." I knew he was right, but I felt strangely reluctant to give up the search. "Let's just check over that ridge," I suggested, pointing to a small hill ahead of us. We climbed up, our boots slipping occasionally on the loose rocks. At the top, we had a better view of the surrounding area, more forest stretching in all directions, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings and small clearings. No sign of the creature. "Look for tracks," I said, though I knew it was probably futile. The ground was too hard, too covered with pine needles to show clear footprints. We searched anyway, examining the areas where we'd heard movement, looking for broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, anything. We found nothing conclusive. Some snapped twigs that could have been from anything, a tuft of what might have been black hair caught on a branch that Mark suggested was probably from a bear. No footprints, no clear evidence of the creature I'd seen. As we finally turned back toward the main trail, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I'd seen something I couldn't explain, something that shouldn't exist according to everything I'd been taught, and yet I had seen it, as clearly as I can see the keyboard I'm typing on now. The hike back was mostly silent. I could tell Mark wasn't sure what to believe. He hadn't seen it himself, only heard the movements. I couldn't blame him for being skeptical. I would have been too if our positions were reversed. "You know," he finally said as we approached the trailhead, "there have been reports of Sasquatch sightings in this area before." I looked at him, surprised. "You believe me?" He shrugged. "I believe you saw something, and those sounds we heard, that wasn't normal wildlife movement. too deliberate. We reached the car just as dusk was falling. I remember sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, not starting the engine right away. My mind was replaying those few seconds over and over, the creature standing up, those long arms, the conical head, the way it moved. "You okay, Dad?" Mark asked. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure if that was true. Just processing. On the drive home, Mark looked up Sasquatch sightings in Manitoba on his phone. There weren't many, but enough to make me feel less crazy. Some even mentioned the same features I'd observed. The cone-shaped head, the long arms, the surprising speed. It's been 9 years since that day, and I've never talked about it publicly until now. Mark and I have discussed it a few times over the years. He's still not entirely convinced, but respects that I believe what I saw. We even went back to Whiteshell the following summer, spent 3 days hiking the same area, but found nothing. I've read every book, watched every documentary I could find on the subject. Some Sasquatch reports match what I saw perfectly, while others describe creatures much larger and more aggressive. I've learned that what I might have encountered could have been a juvenile, explaining its smaller size. The thing that still gets me, that keeps me up some nights, is the intelligence I sensed in that brief moment of eye contact. It wasn't looking at me with the simple curiosity of a wild animal. There was something else there, awareness, calculation, maybe even recognition, like it knew exactly what I was, while I had no idea what it was. I don't expect everyone to believe me. I wouldn't, in your position. But I know what I saw that August afternoon in Whiteshell Provincial Park. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a person, wasn't any recognized animal. And after 9 years of thinking about it, researching it, dreaming about it, I'm more certain now than ever I encountered a Sasquatch that day, and sometimes when I'm hiking alone near sunset and the shadows grow long among the trees, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there it remembers me too. Story 11. I've been debating whether to share this for 20 years now. I'm not looking for attention or trying to convince anyone of anything. I just need to get this off my chest because it's been eating at me for 2 decades, and I still think about it almost daily. I've been hunting since I was 12. My dad taught me everything: tracking, shooting, respecting the land. I'm no amateur in the woods. I've spent most of my life outdoors, faced down angry moose, weathered blizzards, and once had to stitch my own leg after a nasty fall. But nothing prepared me for what happened that day, northwest of Sheridan. It was early November, about 20 years ago. The air had that sharp, clean smell you only get in Wyoming when winter's coming. I'd driven out to one of my favorite spots, not giving the exact location for obvious reasons. It was remote enough that I rarely saw another hunter, which was exactly how I liked it. I parked my truck before sunrise, grabbed my pack and rifle, and started the 3-mile hike to a ridge I'd been successful at before. It was cold but dry, perfect hunting weather. No snow yet, but you could feel it wasn't far off. The mountains were that muted brown-gray they get before winter really sets in. By first light, I was settled in above a small draw where deer frequently passed through. I had good visibility, maybe 150 yards in most directions. I was using my dad's old Remington 30-36. Nothing fancy, but reliable as hell. I'd been sitting there for about 3 hours, just watching and waiting, like I'd done hundreds of times before. Around 9 o'clock, I spotted movement in the brush below. I slowly raised my binoculars, expecting to see a mule deer, hopefully a buck. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. There were 2 creatures. I don't know what else to call them. At first, I thought they were bears standing on their hind legs, but no. They were bipedal, moving with purpose. They were huge, easily 7, maybe 8 feet tall, covered in shaggy hair that varied from dark brown to almost reddish in patches. They had impossibly broad shoulders and arms that hung down past their knees. They were hunched over something on the ground. I adjusted my focus and realized it was a dead deer, looked like a doe. One of the creatures grabbed the deer by its rib cage and lifted it like it weighed nothing, just picked it up with one hand. That's when things got intense. The second creature, slightly larger than the first, lunged forward with shocking speed. It grabbed the first one's arm and shoved it backward with such force that the smaller one, and I use smaller very loosely here, stumbled back several yards. The deer carcass dropped to the ground between them. What followed was unlike anything I've ever witnessed. They didn't roar or scream like you'd expect. The confrontation was almost methodical. They squared off chest to chest, grabbing at each other's arms and shoulders. I could hear the impact of their bodies colliding, solid, heavy thuds that carried up to my position. When one would push, the other would counter, their feet digging into the earth with such force that I could hear brush crushing beneath them. The power these things possessed was terrifying. At one point, the larger one gripped the other around what I'd call its waist and lifted it partially off the ground before the smaller one broke free with a twisting motion. Their strength was beyond human, beyond anything I've seen even from grizzlies. I was frozen in place. I couldn't move, couldn't even think about running. My heart was hammering so hard, I was sure they'd hear it. I kept telling myself they were some kind of bears, but I knew better. Their movements were too deliberate, too controlled, and their shape, upright, with distinct shoulders, necks, heads, was unmistakably humanoid. Then something happened that still gives me nightmares. The larger creature suddenly stopped fighting. It just stopped and turned its head directly toward my position on the ridge. I was well hidden, at least I thought I was, wearing full camo and staying completely still as I'd done countless times hunting. But this thing seemed to lock onto me instantly. It released its grip on the other creature and took a step in my direction. Then another. It was walking directly up the slope toward me, with purpose. Not running, not charging, just walking steadily uphill as if it had all day to reach me. As it got closer, maybe 70 yards away, I could see details that I wish I could forget. Its chest was barrel-shaped, enormously powerful. The hair on its body wasn't uniform, thicker in some areas, especially around the shoulders and chest, thinner on the face and hands. The coloration varied too, mostly dark brown, but with patches of almost reddish auburn mixed in, particularly around its upper back. Its face, God, its face. The nose was wide and flat, almost pushed in. Its mouth was partially open, revealing teeth that looked yellowed, but definitely human-like, not fangs. The eyes were deep-set under a thick, prominent brow ridge. They were dark. I couldn't tell the color from that distance, but they were fixed directly on me. There was intelligence there, awareness, purpose. At about 50 yards away, it stopped. By this point, I was barely breathing. Very slowly, I reached for my rifle. Not to shoot, I had no intention of shooting unless it charged me, but just to have something, anything, between me and this thing. My fingers touched the cold metal of the gun, and the creature's eyes seemed to track the movement. We stayed like that, locked in some kind of standoff, for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. Then, without any obvious reason, it turned. It just turned and walked back down to where the other creature was already dragging the deer carcass toward the tree line at the bottom of the draw. The smaller one had apparently decided the meal was worth more than the fight and had gone back to claim it, while the larger one was focused on me. The larger creature rejoined its companion, and together they disappeared into the forest, taking the deer with them. I could hear branches breaking as they moved through the trees, and then nothing. I stayed frozen in place for at least another 30 minutes, afraid to move. Eventually, the cold and the realization that they were gone snapped me out of it. I packed up faster than I ever have in my life. My hands were shaking so badly, I kept dropping things. The hike back to my truck was the longest 3 miles of my life. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that thing following me. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept my rifle ready the entire time. Safety off, something I'd never normally do. When I finally reached my truck, I threw everything in and got the hell out of there. I drove nearly an hour before I pulled over at a gas station to try to process what had happened. My hands were still shaking when I tried to pump gas. I've never told this story to anyone except my wife. She believes me. She knows me well enough to know I wouldn't make this up. But I've never reported it officially or shared it publicly until now. What would be the point? Who would believe it? I've spent 20 years trying to rationalize what I saw. Maybe they were bears, I tell myself sometimes. Maybe the isolation and the quiet played tricks on my mind. But I know what I saw. The way they moved, the way they fought with such controlled strength, the intelligence in those eyes when it looked at me. These weren't animals. At least not any animals I've ever encountered in all my years outdoors. I've never gone back to that specific spot. I still hunt, still spend time in the mountains, but never there. Not again. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, those two creatures, fighting over territory or food or whatever it was they were establishing that day. I don't know what they were. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, some unknown species. The label doesn't matter to me. All I know is they were real, they were powerful, and for whatever reason, that one decided to let me go when it could have easily done otherwise. The thing that haunts me most isn't the fear I felt. It's the moment when our eyes met. There was something there. Recognition, assessment, decision-making. It wasn't mindless. It wasn't just instinct. Whatever that creature was, it saw me, it considered me, and it made a choice. I still don't know why it turned away. Maybe it decided I wasn't a threat. Maybe it didn't want the trouble, or maybe it just didn't think I was worth the effort. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful. Because I have absolutely no doubt that if it had decided differently, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. That's it. That's what happened. I don't expect anyone to believe me, and honestly, I'm not sure I would believe it either if someone else told me this story. But it happened. And not a day goes by that I don't think about those eyes looking directly into mine and the decision that creature made to walk away. Story 12. I still can't sleep properly when it snows. It's been 22 years, but every January when the temperatures drop, I find myself back there, standing frozen in terror on that pond. I've never shared this publicly before, but perhaps writing it down will help me make sense of what happened that day. It was January 14th, 1902. I was 23 then, living with my folks near the Gooch Ranch in Chesterfield. That winter had been particularly harsh, with temperatures dropping well below what we were used to. The river had frozen solid, something that didn't happen every year, and word had spread that a group was gathering for skating. I remember being excited that morning. My sister Ruth had gotten new skates for Christmas, and this would be her first chance to use them. Our mother packed us a lunch, bread with a bit of ham and some apples, and we set off around 11 in the morning, bundled in every layer we owned. By the time we arrived at the frozen pond, there were already about 15 people there. The Millers had brought their 3 children, the Petersons were there, and several ranch hands from the Gooch place had come down during their midday break. Someone had even built a small fire on the shore where people could warm their hands. The ice was thick, at least 8 inches, Mr. Peterson had checked, and smooth as glass. I'd grown up skating whenever the opportunity presented itself, but Ruth was wobbling like a newborn calf. I spent the first hour just helping her stay upright, her gloved hands clutching mine as she shrieked with equal parts terror and delight. It must have been around 2 in the afternoon when everything changed. The day had been bright and clear, sunlight bouncing off the ice so intensely it hurt your eyes if you looked down too long. But I remember noticing a sudden shadow falling across the pond and thinking clouds must have moved in, except when I looked up, the sky was still perfectly clear. That's when Mrs. Miller screamed. At first I couldn't understand what was happening. Everyone was suddenly moving, scrambling toward the shore opposite the tree line. Ruth slipped and fell hard, and I reached down to pull her up without even taking my eyes off the tree line, trying to see what had caused the panic. And then I saw it. Standing at the edge of the trees was something. Even now, I struggle to describe it accurately. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen. 8 feet at least, maybe more. It was covered in dark hair, not like a bear's fur, but longer, shaggier, hanging in matted clumps. The thing stood on 2 legs, its shoulders hunched forward. But what I remember most clearly was that it held something, a club, or maybe a branch torn from a tree, gripped in one massive hand. For a moment, everything was perfectly still. I could hear Ruth breathing beside me, quick and shallow. I could hear the ice creaking beneath our feet, and I could hear a low, rumbling sound coming from the creature. Not quite a growl, but something deeper, more deliberate. Then Mr. Peterson shouted, "Get to shore!" And chaos erupted. People were slipping, falling, crawling across the ice. The miller's youngest boy was crying. I grabbed Ruth's arm so hard, she later had bruises, and we started moving backward, not daring to turn our backs on the thing. The creature suddenly let out a sound I'll never forget, a roar that seemed to come from something ancient and primal. It lifted its club and struck the ground hard enough that I swear I felt the vibration through the ice beneath my feet. That's when it took a step onto the frozen pond. The ice didn't break. Whatever this thing was, the ice held its weight. It took another step, then another. Its gait was odd, rolling from side to side slightly, but it moved with purpose directly toward our group. I remember Mr. Peterson had a hunting rifle. He'd brought it along because there had been reports of wolves in the area. He fumbled to unsling it from his shoulder, his hands shaking so badly I wasn't sure he'd be able to aim. "Don't shoot unless it charges," Old Man Gooch shouted. He'd come down to the pond with his ranch hands, and despite being nearly 70, he stepped forward, placing himself between the creature and the rest of us. The thing stopped. It tilted its head slightly, almost like it was curious. Then it struck the ice with its club, sending a spiderweb of cracks spreading out from the impact point. I pulled Ruth behind me. We were maybe 30 feet from the shore at this point. My legs were trembling so badly I wasn't sure I could make it. The ice suddenly felt treacherously thin beneath us, though I knew that was just fear playing tricks. The creature took another step forward, and that's when Mr. Peterson fired. The shot cracked through the air, echoing off the surrounding hills. I couldn't tell if he hit it or not. The creature jerked back, letting out another one of those roars. But instead of charging or retreating, it simply stood there, beating its club against the ice rhythmically, like it was trying to tell us something. We made it to shore, scrambling up the slight embankment. Mr. Gooch and Mr. Peterson stayed at the edge, rifles ready. The creature remained on the ice, watching us. Its eyes, God, its eyes. They weren't animal eyes. There was something in them, something that made my skin crawl. It was looking at us like it understood exactly what we were and was deciding what to do about it. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, it turned and walked back toward the trees, its movements fluid despite its size. Just before it reached the tree line, it stopped, turned back to look at us one more time, and beat its club against a tree trunk with such force that bark exploded outward. Then it was gone. No one moved for a long time. Mrs. Miller was clutching her children, whispering prayers. One of the ranch hands was vomiting into the snow. Ruth was shaking so badly against me that I could hear her teeth chattering. "What in God's name was that?" someone finally asked. No one had an answer. Mr. Gooch organized the men into a group. "We need to see if we can track it," he said, his voice steadier than I would have expected. "Ladies, children, you head straight back to town. Stay together. Don't stop for anything." I wanted to go with them. Some foolish part of me wanted to see the creature again, to convince myself it was real and not some mass delusion. But Ruth was practically catatonic with fear, and someone needed to get her home. As we gathered our things, I watched Mr. Gooch, Mr. Peterson, and 5 of the ranch hands cautiously approach the spot where the creature had entered the woods. I saw them stop suddenly, all of them staring at the ground. Later, Mr. Peterson told me what they'd found. Tracks in the snow, unlike anything he'd ever seen before. 4-toed footprints, each one 22 inches long and 7 inches wide. "Not bear," he said, his face pale as he described them to a group that had gathered at the general store that evening. "Bears have 5 toes and not human. No man alive has feet that size." They'd followed the tracks for about half a mile before losing them, where the creature apparently crossed a rocky ridge. A search party was organized for the next day, with men coming from as far as Soda Springs to join. They found nothing. In the weeks that followed, people spoke of little else. Theories abounded. Everything from an escaped circus animal to an Indian legend come to life. Some even suggested it was the devil himself. The pastor gave a sermon about mass hysteria and the dangers of an overactive imagination. But 16 of us saw it that day. 16 perfectly rational people who all described the same thing. A massive, hair-covered creature that walked like a man but wasn't a man. For months afterward, no one would go near that pond after dark. Children weren't allowed to play outdoors alone. Men carried rifles when they went to check their livestock. The creature never returned, at least not that anyone reported. By spring, people had mostly stopped talking about it. Life went back to normal, or something close to it, but I never forgot. How could I? 22 years later, I still remember every detail. The matted dark hair, the strange rolling gait, the intelligence in those eyes, the sound of that club striking the ice. Sometimes when I'm alone, I wonder if it's still out there, moving through the forests and hills. I wonder if it remembers us as clearly as we remember it. And I wonder what might have happened if Mr. Peterson's shot had found its mark, or if the creature had decided to cross that pond completely. Ruth moved away years ago, said she couldn't stand another Idaho winter. I understood. When the snow falls and the rivers freeze, I find myself watching the tree line, half expecting to see a massive silhouette emerge. I keep a loaded rifle by my door now, just in case. The world's different now than it was in 1992. People say there's no place left for mysteries, that we've mapped and explained everything. But I know better. I know that there are things in this world that defy explanation. I saw one with my own eyes on that frozen pond, and sometimes, on the coldest nights when the wind howls around my cabin, I swear I can hear something moving outside, something heavy, deliberate, something that remembers me as clearly as I remember it. Story 13. I'm still shaking as I write this, even though it happened just yesterday. My husband Michael and I have lived in our little slice of rural Alabama for almost 3 years now. We bought this place because we wanted privacy, space for our dogs to run, and to be surrounded by nature. Our property backs up to about 60 acres of dense forest that belongs to some timber company, though they haven't harvested anything from it in years. Usually, that forest is our sanctuary. Now, I'm sitting here with all the blinds closed, jumping at every sound. It started this past Monday. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner, enjoying the unseasonably warm February evening when we heard it. At first, I thought it might be coyotes. We get them around here sometimes. But this was different. It was a long, drawn-out vocalization that seemed to echo through the trees. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream. It was far off, maybe half a mile into the woods, but clear enough that Michael and I both stopped mid-conversation and looked at each other. "Did you hear that?" he asked, already knowing the answer from my face. "Yeah," I whispered, not sure why I was keeping my voice down. "What was it?" Michael shook his head. "No idea. Doesn't sound like any animal I know." We sat there for another 20 minutes, but didn't hear it again. I tried to brush it off, probably just some animal I wasn't familiar with, or maybe sound carrying weirdly from the highway a few miles away, but something about it stuck with me, nagged at the back of my mind. The next night, Tuesday, we were inside watching TV when our older dog, Rex, suddenly stood up from his bed and stared at the back door, hackles raised. He's usually pretty calm, so seeing him alert like that put me on edge. Michael muted the TV, and that's when we heard it again. The same strange call, but closer this time. It was a long, almost mournful sound that rose and fell in pitch. It reminded me of those Bigfoot recordings they play on those cryptid hunting shows, though I'd never really believed in that stuff. Rex started barking, which set off our younger dog too. Michael went to the back door and flipped on the floodlights we've mounted on the back of the house. They illuminate about 30 yards of our backyard before the tree line starts. But we couldn't see anything unusual. The calls stopped as soon as the lights came on. "Probably just a weird owl or something," Michael said, but I could tell he didn't believe it either. That brings me to yesterday, Wednesday. It had been a normal day. I worked from home while Michael was at his construction job. He got home around 5:30, and after dinner, we decided to go stand on the carport and have a smoke. The sun was setting, that dusky in-between time when the light gets all fuzzy and shadows start stretching across the ground. We were just talking about maybe extending the carport this spring when something caught my eye at the edge of the woods. At first, I thought it was just the way the shadows were falling across one of the trees about 40 yards in. But then I realized what I was seeing. Something large and dark was leaning out from behind a massive oak tree, just enough that I could make out a silhouette. I froze mid-sentence. Michael noticed and followed my gaze, then went completely still beside me. "Do you see that?" I whispered, afraid to move. "Yeah," he breathed. "What the hell is that?" Whatever it wasn't moving. It was just watching us. The shape was distinctly upright, not like a bear on its hind legs, but naturally vertical. I couldn't make out features in the dimming light, but I could tell it was massive, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, based on where it stood relative to the tree, and it was broad with wide shoulders. We stood there, locked in this bizarre staring contest for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it moved, and my blood ran cold. It didn't step out from behind the tree. Instead, it shifted, leaning its head and upper body to the other side of the trunk, like it was trying to keep us in view while remaining hidden. "It's watching us," Michael whispered. "What is it doing?" For the next several minutes, I'd guess 5 or 6, though time felt weirdly stretched. This thing kept moving around the tree. It would peek out from one side, then shift to the other, never fully exposing itself, but never taking what I somehow knew were its eyes off us. Sometimes it would duck down slightly, other times it seemed to stretch upward. The movements were deliberate, almost careful, like it was studying us but didn't want to be fully seen. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just branches moving in the wind, creating a weird pattern of shadows. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks in the fading light. I even squinted, trying to make the shape resolve into something familiar and non-threatening. "I'm going to get my phone," Michael said softly, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't move," I said, not sure why I was so terrified of this thing, seeing us make any sudden movements. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt exposed, standing there on the carport, like we were spotlit on a stage while this thing lurked in the shadows. After a few more minutes of this bizarre behavior, I couldn't take it anymore. "Let's go inside," I whispered to Michael. Slowly. We started to back up toward the door. I kept my eyes on the tree the whole time, watching as the figure continued its strange, peeking behavior. As I reached for the doorknob, I glanced away for just a second. When I looked back, the figure was moving, and God, how it moved. It wasn't lumbering or awkward like you might expect from something so large. It was fast, terrifyingly fast, and ran with a powerful, fluid stride on 2 legs. It crossed from the tree to deeper woods in seconds, but in that brief moment of movement, there was no mistaking what I was seeing. It was covered in dark hair, almost black in the dim light. Its arms were long, swinging with its stride. The head sat directly on broad shoulders with barely any neck visible. "Michael," I gasped. And he turned just in time to catch the last glimpse before it disappeared into the trees. We practically fell through the doorway, slamming and locking it behind us. The dogs immediately started going crazy, barking and running to the back door like they sensed something was wrong. Did you see that? I was trembling so hard I could barely speak. Tell me you saw that. Michael's face was pale. I saw it. Jesus Christ, I saw it. We spent the next hour with all the lights on, checking every door and window lock. I kept thinking about how it had just been watching us, studying us from what it thought was a safe distance. How long had it been there? Had it been watching our house on previous nights too? Neither of us slept much last night. Every crack and groan of the house made me jump. At about 3 in the morning, Rex started growling at the back door again, but we were too scared to look outside. I buried my head under the pillow and tried to convince myself this was all some weird shared hallucination. This morning, after Michael left for work, he didn't want to go, but we need the money, I worked up the courage to walk to the edge of our yard and look at that tree. The ground around it was disturbed. Leaves and pine needles brushed aside, exposing the dirt underneath. And there, pressed into the soft earth, was what looked like a footprint. It was huge, easily 16 inches long, with what appeared to be 5 toes. The impression was deep, like whatever made it was incredibly heavy. I took pictures with my phone, but they don't really capture it well. By the time Michael gets home, I'm worried rain will have washed it away. There's a storm coming in tonight, according to the forecast. I've spent all day researching, trying to make sense of what we saw. Everything points to the same conclusion, as crazy as it sounds. The vocalizations, the size, the behavior, the footprint. We saw a Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, or whatever you want to call it. Something that shouldn't exist, but clearly does. The weirdest part was how it was behaving. That hide-and-seek peeking from behind the tree. It was so deliberate, so intelligent, like it was curious about us but shy or cautious. That's what keeps replaying in my mind. Not just that this creature exists, but that it was studying us, trying to understand what we were while staying hidden. I don't know what to do now. Do we call someone who would even believe us? Would reporting this bring a bunch of hunters or cryptid enthusiasts tramping through our woods, maybe angering whatever this thing is? Part of me doesn't want anyone to disturb it. It didn't seem aggressive, just curious. But another part of me is terrified. Our bedroom window faces those woods. Every night, when I turn off the light, I'll be wondering if it's out there, watching us through the glass. I haven't told any of our friends or family. They'd think we were crazy or on drugs. So I'm telling you all instead. I know there are skeptics here, and honestly, I was one too until yesterday, but I know what I saw. It was real, it was intelligent, and it's living in our woods. The sun is starting to set now. Michael should be home soon. I've got all the blinds closed and the floodlights on, and I keep thinking about those eyes I couldn't see, but somehow felt, watching us from behind that tree. Story 14. I've always been fascinated by cryptids and unexplained phenomena, but I never truly believed I'd experience anything firsthand. That changed last summer when I joined a Bigfoot research expedition near Portland, Oregon. I'm still struggling to make sense of what happened that night. Our group consisted of 5 people. Marcus was our leader, a guy in his 50s who'd been researching Sasquatch for over 20 years and had organized dozens of expeditions. He brought his 19-year-old son, Tyler. Then there was Dave, a 30-something military veteran who'd recently returned from overseas deployment. Richard, an older gentleman, probably in his 60s, who'd been Marcus's research partner for years. And me, a skeptical but curious first-timer. We'd chosen this specific area because Marcus said it had one of the highest concentrations of reported Sasquatch encounters in the country. I remember checking the weather that morning. Clear skies predicted, temperature around 55 degrees. Perfect conditions for an overnight expedition. We arrived at the base camp area around 3 in the afternoon. While setting up our equipment, Marcus briefed us on protocol. "We're visitors here," he explained, showing a level of respect that surprised me. "We don't run if we encounter something. We don't scream. We don't point bright lights directly at anything. We're here to observe and document, not to threaten. I nodded along, still not fully believing we'd find anything but enjoying the wilderness experience regardless. We spent the remaining daylight hours reviewing thermal imaging cameras, audio recorders, and night vision equipment. Marcus also showed us a wooden contraption he called a tree knocker, basically a foot-long piece of hardwood with a handle. Knocking is communication, he explained. It's how they signal each other across distances. After a quick meal, we geared up for our night excursion. I pulled on an extra layer as the temperature had dropped considerably after sunset. Everyone wore dark clothing and carried minimal equipment, just small backpacks with water, snacks, and personal recording devices. Marcus insisted we all wear red-filtered headlamps to preserve our night vision without flooding the forest with white light. We headed out around 11 at night. Marcus led us to an old logging road that had been closed off years ago. The moon was nearly full, casting eerie shadows through the trees as we walked. I remember feeling a strange mix of excitement and uneasiness as we moved deeper into the forest. The second-growth trees gradually gave way to older, taller specimens, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere that made me feel increasingly small. "This is where it gets interesting," Marcus whispered as we approached a large dirt berm blocking vehicle access. "Once we cross this, we're entering prime territory." I still remember the exact moment we stepped over that threshold. It's hard to explain, but the atmosphere changed instantly. The air felt heavier, more charged somehow. The forest sounds, the subtle rustling of leaves, distant owl calls, seemed to become more deliberate, as if the woods themselves were suddenly aware of our presence. Dave took point position since he had military training. Marcus and Tyler followed, then me, with Richard bringing up the rear. We moved in single file along a ridge path that was maybe 5 feet wide. To our right, the ground dropped off steeply into thick underbrush. To our left, the terrain sloped sharply upward into dense, old-growth forest that the moonlight barely penetrated. After walking for about 20 minutes, we came to a fallen tree blocking the path. We carefully stepped over it one by one. Once we were all across, Marcus stopped and pulled out his tree knocker. The sound of wood striking wood echoed through the silent forest as he delivered a pattern. 2 knocks, pause, 2 more knocks. We stood motionless, listening. Nothing happened for several long minutes, and I remember thinking this was all just elaborate make-believe. Then Richard, at the back of our line, raised his hand for attention. "Something's following us down there," he whispered, pointing toward the steep drop-off to our right. "I've been hearing light tapping sounds for the past 5 minutes. They're keeping pace with us." A chill ran down my spine. I strained to hear, but couldn't detect anything. Marcus nodded as if this was exactly what he'd expected and motioned for us to continue forward slowly. We reached a bend in the old road where the moonlight streamed through a break in the canopy, illuminating our path. Marcus raised his hand and we stopped again. He performed another series of knocks, this time 3 in quick succession, followed by a single knock. What happened next will stay with me forever. From just beyond the tree line to our left, no more than 50 feet away, came a response. But this wasn't some faint, ambiguous sound that could be dismissed as wildlife or falling branches. This was deliberate, powerful knocking that echoed through the forest. 3 rapid knocks followed by a single, heavier knock that seemed to vibrate through my chest. "Holy shit," I whispered involuntarily. Dave's hand immediately shot up in a military gesture for silence. The knocking came again, this time in a different pattern. 2 slow, deliberate strikes. Marcus crouched down, motioning for us to do the same. He responded with his knocker, matching the new pattern. For the next 15 minutes, this bizarre conversation continued. What struck me most wasn't just the knocking itself, but the clear intelligence behind it. This wasn't random animal behavior. There was rhythm, timing, response. Something was communicating with us. During a brief pause, I heard Tyler whisper to his dad, "It's moving closer." Sure enough, the next series of knocks came from perhaps 30 feet away. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My mouth was completely dry. Marcus continued the exchange, but I noticed his demeanor had changed. He was still calm, but more alert, more cautious. After another round of knocks, he spoke softly, just loud enough to be heard. "Thank you for allowing us into your space. We mean no harm and will be leaving soon." He stood slowly and gave us a subtle nod to start backing away. We began retracing our steps, maintaining the same order, but moving more deliberately now. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were our footsteps on the forest floor and our increasingly rapid breathing. We'd made it about halfway back to the berm when Richard whispered, "They're following us." I glanced back and saw nothing, but then Richard pointed to something in the trees. At first, I couldn't make anything out. Then I saw it. Two yellowish-green points of light, like reflective eyes, about 7 feet off the ground. They blinked once and vanished. "Keep moving," Marcus instructed quietly. "Don't run." It took every ounce of willpower not to break into a sprint. As we continued walking, I became acutely aware of soft rustling sounds keeping pace with us in the forest to our left. Occasionally, I'd catch glimpses of movement. Never a clear shape, just the suggestion of something large moving between trees. Then came the vocalizations. They started as low, almost inaudible rumbles that could have been mistaken for distant thunder. But they gradually transformed into something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. A series of soft whoops, and what I can only describe as speech-like utterances. Not English, not any language I recognized, but definitely structured sounds that seemed to convey meaning. At one point, Dave stopped abruptly, causing us all to halt. He pointed to the ground where the moonlight revealed an enormous footprint in a patch of soft earth. It was at least 16 inches long with 5 distinct toes. It was much too large to be human, with a depth that suggested whatever made it was incredibly heavy. "That wasn't there when we came through earlier," Dave whispered. As we approached the berm that marked the boundary of this territory, the activity intensified. The knocking came from multiple directions now, ahead, behind, to both sides. It was as if we were being escorted out by unseen watchers. Just as we crossed back over the berm, I heard a final vocalization, a long, mournful sound that started low and rose in pitch before fading away. It wasn't threatening. If anything, it felt almost like a farewell. We made it back to our vehicles around 2 in the morning. For several minutes, nobody spoke. We just stood there, processing what had happened. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. They allowed us to visit. That's rare. "What exactly were they?" I asked, my voice shakier than I'd have liked. Marcus shook his head. "Everyone has a different name for them. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, forest people. What matters is that they're intelligent, they communicate, and they've been here a lot longer than we have." It's been 11 months since that night, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I've gone back and reviewed my audio recordings dozens of times. The knocks are clearly there. So are the strange vocalizations. But it's the feeling that I can't capture on any recording. That sense of being in the presence of something ancient and aware, something that was studying us just as intently as we were trying to study it. I don't know if what we encountered fits the traditional Bigfoot description from pop culture. I never saw a full figure, never got a clear look at a face, but I know with absolute certainty that we were interacting with something intelligent that wasn't human, something that communicates through knocks and calls, something that moves through the forest with purpose and awareness. The most unsettling part isn't what I experienced that night. It's realizing that these beings could be out there in forests all across the country, watching, listening, largely undetected. How many hikers and campers have been observed without ever knowing? How many strange sounds, dismissed as the wind or animals, were actually attempts at communication? I've gone back to those woods twice since then, alone. I haven't experienced anything like that night with the group. But sometimes, when I'm hiking and stop to rest, I'll hear a distant knock echoing through the trees. And I always knock back. Story 15. I still can't believe I'm actually writing this out. I've told a few close friends over the years, but most people look at you like you're insane when you mention something like this. It's been 16 years, but I remember everything about that night like it happened yesterday. It was September 2007, and I was 15 years old. My family had this nice house near a small private lake outside Middlebury, Vermont. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, people leave their doors unlocked, and nothing ever really happens. Our house was pretty secluded, with woods surrounding most of the property and the lake just a short walk away. That night, my girlfriend Mia was staying over for a weekend sleepover with my sisters. My parents were pretty cool about having her over, since she was friends with my sisters too, and they trusted us. My parents went to bed early that night, around 10, which was normal for them. We were all hanging out in the basement watching movies when I got this stupid idea. It was around 11:30, and I suggested we sneak out and walk around the lake. It wasn't that big, maybe a mile around, and we'd done it plenty of times during the day, but at night, that was new and it seemed exciting. My sisters, Sophie and Emma, 13 and 11 at the time, were immediately on board. Mia was hesitant at first, but eventually gave in when we all promised not to go far from the road. Looking back, I wish she had convinced us to stay home. We snuck out through the basement door, trying not to laugh or make noise. The night was clear but dark, one of those September nights where summer is definitely over and there's a chill in the air. The moon was out, but it wasn't full, so we used the flashlight on my flip phone to guide us onto the gravel road that circled the lake. Everything was fine at first. We were talking quietly, shoving each other, just being dumb kids. The lake was really still and reflected the moon and stars. I remember thinking how cool it looked and putting my arm around Mia as we walked. We got about halfway around the lake when the road dipped between two really dense sections of forest. During the day, it's just a normal stretch of road, but at night it felt like a tunnel of darkness. The trees on both sides were tall pines mixed with old oaks and maples that blocked out what little moonlight there was. I remember the exact moment everything changed. We were walking through this stretch, and I heard something behind us, not like a squirrel or raccoon. This was heavy, like someone stepping onto the gravel road, heavy, crunching footsteps, just one or two at first. I stopped and turned around while the others kept walking. They didn't hear it, I guess. What I saw next, I've tried to rationalize it for years, but I can't. About 5 feet behind us, this thing stepped out of the trees onto the road. It was massive. That's the first thing that hit me, the sheer size of it. It was walking upright, completely covered in dark hair. I couldn't tell if it was dark brown or black in the darkness, but it was shaggy, hanging longer on its arms and legs. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. Its arms hung down to near its knees, and they were thick, not like human arms at all. What freaked me out most was its head. It sat directly on these impossibly broad shoulders, with no visible neck, just this massive head right on top of shoulders. The whole thing happened in seconds. The creature crossed the road in just a few smooth, deliberate steps. It moved with this strange grace that doesn't make sense for something so big. Then it just disappeared into the brush on the other side. It never looked at us, never acknowledged we were even there. I couldn't move. I literally couldn't make my body function. Then I screamed, not like a horror movie scream, but this choked, strangled sound. My sister Sophie turned around when she heard me. She saw it just as it reached the edge of the road. I'll never forget her face. Absolute terror, pure, unfiltered fear. "Run!" I yelled, and we all took off. Mia and Emma hadn't seen it, but they knew something was wrong and started running without question. We sprinted all the way back to my house, probably half a mile, without stopping once. I've never run so fast in my life. We burst through the door, locked it behind us, and ran straight to my room. My parents somehow slept through the whole thing. We huddled in my room with the lights on, and I pushed my dresser in front of the door. Nobody slept that night, not a single minute. We just sat there trying to process what we'd seen. Sophie kept saying, "That wasn't a person. That wasn't a person." Over and over, Emma and Mia were asking us what we saw, and I tried to explain, but how do you explain something like that? I kept saying it was huge, hairy, walking on 2 legs. Emma thought we were playing a prank on them at first, but she could tell by our faces we weren't joking. The worst part was realizing that its face, the split second I saw it, was flat and almost person-like, but wider and covered in hair, except around the eyes and nose. I only saw it for those few seconds, but it was enough to completely change how I viewed the woods around our lake forever. I didn't have the vocabulary for it then, but looking back, what I saw matched descriptions of Bigfoot. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I know. If someone told me this story, I'd think they were full of it or saw a bear standing up or something. But bears don't walk across roads on 2 legs with that kind of smooth movement. They don't have that body shape, and they definitely don't stand 7 feet tall with arms hanging to their knees. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept having these nightmares where I'd be alone on that road, and that thing would be following me, getting closer and closer. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced it was in my room. What's really freaky is that after it happened, I started noticing things I'd ignored before, like how there were always strange noises around the lake at night. Not just normal forest sounds, but weird whooping calls, and sometimes what sounded like wood knocking against wood. Our dog would refuse to go into certain parts of the woods, even during the day. And a few neighbors had mentioned hearing unexplained sounds in the woods over the years. My parents never believed us. They thought we'd seen a moose or a bear and gotten scared because it was dark. But I know what I saw. Sophie knows what she saw. It wasn't a bear or a moose or a man in a costume. No costume is that realistic, and no person is that big or moves like that. For months after, I wouldn't go near the woods, especially not at night. If I had to walk anywhere after dark, I'd have my dad drive me. I made up excuses about being tired or having too much homework. The truth was, I was terrified of seeing that thing again. Mia broke up with me a few weeks later. She never said it was because of that night. But I think it changed how she saw me. Maybe she thought I was making it up. Or maybe the way I acted afterward, jumpy, paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, was too much for her to deal with. Sophie and I never really talked about it again after the first few days. It was like we made this unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened. But sometimes I'd catch her staring out the window toward the lake with this distant look in her eyes, and I knew she was thinking about it too. We moved away from that house the next year. My dad got a job in another state, and I was secretly relieved. I never felt comfortable there again. Every time I went outside at night, I felt like I was being watched. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made me freeze. The worst part is not knowing what it was, why it was there, or if it was aware of us. Not knowing if it lived in those woods or was just passing through. Not knowing if anyone else has seen it or if they'd believe me if I told them. I'm 31 now, and I still can't explain what I saw that night. I've researched Bigfoot sightings over the years, and some descriptions match exactly what I saw, but I've never reported it officially because I don't want to be that guy, the crazy one who claims he saw Bigfoot. Sometimes I think about going back to that lake, just to see if I can find any evidence, or maybe get some closure. But honestly, I'm still scared. Not just of seeing that creature again, but of not seeing anything at all and having to face the possibility that my 15-year-old mind somehow manufactured the whole thing. But Sophie saw it too, and sometimes when we get together at family events, I'll catch her eye, and I know she's remembering it just like I am. We don't need to say anything. We both know what we saw. I still camp and hike sometimes, but never alone, and I'm always hyper-aware of my surroundings. I keep thinking I'll eventually forget the details, or the fear will fade, but it hasn't. 16 years later, and I can still picture every detail of that creature crossing the road in those few seconds. I don't know what's out there in the forests of Vermont or elsewhere, but I know what I saw, and I know I never want to see it again. Story 16. I've been debating whether to post this for months now. My fiancé finally convinced me I should get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. This happened on July 23rd, 2019. And I still get chills thinking about it. For context, my fiancé and I live just outside Kimbolton, Ohio. It's a tiny place most people have never heard of, close to Salt Fork State Park. We're pretty isolated out here, which is usually the way we like it. We've got woods all around us, and Weber Hill Road runs nearby. That summer evening started like any other. We'd gone into town earlier that day to pick up some supplies and visit her parents. Nothing unusual. It was starting to get dark as we headed home on our four-wheeler. Something we'd done hundreds of times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky this deep orange color, but the trees made everything darker than it should have been. I remember feeling oddly uneasy that evening. You know that feeling when the hairs on your neck stand up for no reason? I kept brushing it off as nothing. We were maybe half a mile from our place, going up Weber Hill Road. The engine was pretty loud, echoing through the trees, and my fiancée had her arms wrapped around my waist. The hill isn't super steep, but it's enough that you have to give the four-wheeler some gas to get up comfortably. I was focused on the path ahead when something caught my eye to the left. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks. It happens all the time in these woods at dusk, but then I saw it clearly. About 10 feet ahead of us, partially hidden behind a tree, was something massive. And I mean massive. I immediately hit the brakes, nearly sending us both flying forward. The four-wheeler skidded a bit on the gravel. "What the hell, Frank?" my fiancé shouted, but I couldn't even respond. Whatever this thing was, it was standing upright on two legs. I'd guess 7, maybe 8 feet tall. The tree it was behind wasn't small, but this thing made it look like a sapling. It was dark, not just shadowy dark, but covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. I could only see part of it because it was peeking from behind the tree, like it was trying to hide, but couldn't quite manage because of its size. The weird part was how still it was, like unnaturally still. But I could feel it watching us. I've been hunting these woods since I was a kid. I know every animal that lives here. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. This thing was standing exactly like a person would, but massive, broader, and covered in dark hair. I don't know how long we sat there. Probably only seconds, but it felt like minutes. My fiancée kept asking what was wrong, but she was behind me and couldn't see what I was seeing. Something about its stillness terrified me more than if it had charged us. Every instinct in my body screamed, "Danger!" Without thinking, I yanked the four-wheeler around so hard we nearly tipped over. I gunned it back down the hill faster than was safe. My fiancée was yelling at me, asking what the hell I was doing, but I couldn't even explain. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't slow down until we reached the main road, and even then, I kept checking behind us. When we finally got home, I locked every door and window. My fiancée thought I'd lost my mind until she saw my hands shaking as I tried to get the key in the lock. Inside, I collapsed on the couch. She sat next to me, really concerned now. "What happened back there?" she asked. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but it sounded crazy even as I said it. A massive, hair-covered humanoid figure just standing in the woods. She didn't laugh or anything, but I could tell she thought maybe my eyes had played tricks on me in the fading light. "I swear to God," I told her, "this wasn't a bear or a person. It was too big, too wrong." I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made me jump. I kept picturing that thing following us home, watching our house from the tree line. I got up several times to check the doors were still locked. My fiancée tried to comfort me, but she hadn't seen it. She couldn't understand the pure, primal fear I'd felt. The next morning, I felt stupid. In the daylight, everything seems less threatening, right? I almost convinced myself I'd seen a bear standing oddly, or maybe just a weird shadow. My fiancée suggested we go back and look. If we find nothing, you can stop worrying, she said. And if we find something, at least you'll know you're not crazy. I didn't want to go. The thought of returning to that spot made my stomach knot up. But I also needed to know. So around noon, we drove back up Weber Hill Road in our truck, not the four-wheeler. I figured if we needed to get away fast, the truck was better. Plus, something about being in an enclosed vehicle felt safer. We parked near where I'd seen the thing. The woods looked normal in daylight, just trees and undergrowth, nothing sinister. Still, I didn't want to get out of the truck. My fiancée, braver than me, was already stepping out. "Show me exactly where you saw it," she said. Reluctantly, I got out and pointed to the tree. Right there, it was standing behind that one, looking out at us. She walked over, completely unafraid. I followed, constantly scanning the woods around us. The ground was soft from rain a few days earlier, and as we got closer to the tree, I spotted them. Footprints, but not human footprints. These were huge, easily twice the size of my boot, and I wear a size 11. They were deep, too, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. My fiancée saw them, too. Her face went pale. What the hell made these? The prints were clearly bipedal, but wider and longer than any humans. They led from deeper in the woods to the tree and then back in again. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into thicker underbrush. "This is what I saw," I whispered. "Whatever made these was watching us last night. We took some pictures with our phones, though they don't really capture how unsettling those prints were in person. They weren't perfect impressions, just deep depressions in the soft earth. But they were unmistakably footprints made by something walking on two legs. We didn't stay long. Something about that place felt wrong, even in daylight. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just stillness. We got back in the truck and left. On the drive home, my fiancée was quiet. Finally, she said, "I believe you now. That wasn't a bear." Over the next few days, I did some research. Salt Fork State Park, which isn't far from us, apparently has a history of Bigfoot sightings. I'd always laughed that off as tourist nonsense, or people mistaking bears for something else. I'm not laughing anymore. We've talked about reporting it, but to who? The local sheriff would think we were nuts. There's apparently some Bigfoot research groups in Ohio, but I'm not sure I want to draw attention to our home. What if more people come looking, and it makes whatever's out there angry or territorial? For about a week after, I wouldn't go outside after dark. My fiancée thought I was overreacting, until one night when all the dogs in the area started howling at once. Not barking, howling like they were terrified. It lasted for nearly 20 minutes. She didn't say anything, but she was the one who double-checked the locks that night. I've lived in these woods my whole life and never felt unsafe until now. Whatever I saw wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to exist. It's been 3 months, and I still take the long way around Weber Hill when I can. When I can't avoid it, I drive fast and never stop. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't just what I saw. It's the question of whether it saw me too, whether it recognized me, whether it's still out there watching and waiting. Because if there's one thing that struck me about that encounter, it's that this didn't feel like a random animal sighting. The way it was standing there, partially hidden, it felt deliberate, like it wanted to be seen just enough to send a message. Last week I was taking out the trash at dusk and thought I saw something moving at the edge of our property, where the yard meets the tree line, just a shadow, there and gone so fast I couldn't be sure. But that feeling came back, that bone-deep certainty that something was watching me. I've started carrying my hunting rifle when I go outside after dark. My fiancée thinks I'm being paranoid, but she didn't see what I saw. She only saw the footprints afterward. She didn't feel those eyes on her. I don't know what to do. Move away? That seems extreme. And this is our home. Report it to who? And what would they do? I'm not even sure I want anyone trying to find this thing. Some things should maybe just be left alone. All I know is that something is in these woods that shouldn't be here. Something intelligent enough to hide, big enough to terrify, and real enough to leave footprints. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the night is dark, I swear I can hear heavy footsteps moving through the trees behind our house. So that's my story. I don't have any dramatic conclusion or explanation, just a warning, I guess, for anyone living near or visiting the woods around Kimbolton or Salt Fork. There's something out there, something watching. And if you ever find yourself on Weber Hill Road at dusk, don't stop. Don't look into the trees. Just keep driving as fast as you can. Story 17. I still can't believe what happened to me last September. I've spent months trying to make sense of it, but I just can't. Maybe writing it down will help. I've been following this community for a while, but never thought I'd be posting my own experience. I work as a nurse at a small clinic outside Pine Bluff, Arkansas. We're short-staffed, so I often cover late shifts. On that night in September 2021, I was exhausted after a 12-hour shift that ran even longer because my replacement called in sick. By the time I left, it was already around 11:30 at night. The drive home usually takes about 40 minutes, mostly on back roads cutting through dense woods. I've done this drive hundreds of times, so I was on autopilot, radio low, thinking about what I'd heat up for dinner when I got home. County Road 15 is this narrow two-lane road that winds through thick pine forest for about 7 miles. No streetlights, no houses, just trees pressing in from both sides. The moon was barely visible through the clouds that night, making it extra dark. I remember checking my phone at a stop sign, 11:42 p.m., before turning onto County Road 15. The only light came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. I was about 3 miles in when something caught my eye up ahead on the right shoulder. At first I thought it was a deer. We get tons of them around here, and they're always darting across the road. But as I got closer, something felt off about the shape. It wasn't moving like a deer. It was too low to the ground, but too big to be a wild hog. I slowed down to maybe 15 miles per hour, squinting to make out what it was. That's when my stomach first dropped. Whatever this thing was, it didn't fit anything I recognized. It had these wide shoulders and a weird body shape, lower in the front and higher in the back. The fur looked dark gray, or maybe brownish in my headlights. It was moving strangely, kind of shuffling along the side of the road. When I got about 50 feet away, it stopped moving completely. Then it turned its head toward my car, and I saw its eyes catch the light. They reflected back this reddish-orange color. Not like a deer's eyes at all, more like when you catch a dog's eyes in a flash photo, but wrong somehow. I pressed my brake pedal harder, slowing to a crawl. That's when I got my first clear look at its face. Oh God. Even now, typing this makes my hands shake. Its face wasn't like any animal I've ever seen. It was almost flat, like a human face, but covered in thick hair around the cheeks and jaw. The nose was broad and flattened, but the worst part was when it moved. What I had thought was its front leg. It wasn't a leg, it was an arm, with a hand. A freaking hand with fingers that moved independently, gripping the ground as it shifted its weight. That's when I realized it had been crawling on all fours, hunched over like it was trying to stay low to the ground. I sat there, frozen, my car idling on the empty road. I couldn't even reach for my phone to take a picture. My brain just couldn't process what I was seeing. Then it moved, in one fluid motion, way too smooth and coordinated for something that size. It rose up onto its hind legs. Standing upright, it was massive, had to be over 7 feet tall. Its body was thick and solid, entirely covered in that same dark hair. The chest was broad, and its arms, God, its arms hung down past its knees. It turned to fully face my car, and I could see more details in the headlights. The skin around its eyes and nose was darker, almost black, in contrast to the hair covering the rest of its body. Its eyes were deep set, and they looked intelligent. That's what freaked me out the most. There was something behind those eyes, something thinking. When it took a step toward my car, I panicked and started backing up. I had my foot on the brake, trying to keep some distance between us, while my mind raced for what to do. Should I try to drive around it? Was there room? Would it attack my car? That's when it happened. The thing opened its mouth, way wider than should be possible, and let out this scream that I felt more than heard. It was like a physical force hitting my car. The sound was this mix of a roar and a howl that made my insides vibrate. I could see its teeth as its jaw muscles flexed with the noise, the mouth stretched so unnaturally wide that it didn't even look possible. My whole body went cold. I've never felt terror like that before. Pure, primal fear that bypasses all rational thought. The creature took another step toward me, and something in my brain finally snapped back into action. I slammed the gas pedal and swerved around it, driving on the wrong side of the road. As I passed, I swear I felt the car shake slightly, like it had reached out toward me. I didn't look in my rearview mirror. I couldn't. I just drove. I don't remember most of that drive home. I was shaking so badly I could barely keep the car on the road. My teeth were chattering even though it wasn't cold. I kept checking my mirrors, terrified that somehow it was following me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there with the engine off for what felt like hours. I couldn't make myself get out of the car. What if it had followed me home? What if it was waiting in the darkness beyond my porch light? Eventually, I made a run for it, fumbling with my keys, locking the door behind me, and checking every window and door in the house twice. I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat in the dark, listening. Every creak of the house settling made me jump. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, in the daylight, I went out to check my car. There was mud splattered along the lower sides, but no dents or scratches, no evidence of what I'd seen. For a minute, I almost convinced myself it had been a hallucination from exhaustion, but I know what I saw. I called in sick that day. I couldn't face driving anywhere. When I finally went back to work, I took a different route, one that added 20 minutes to my commute, but stayed on more populated roads. I haven't driven down County Road 15 since that night. I don't care if it makes my drive longer or costs me more in gas. Nothing could make me go back there after dark. I've spent months trying to rationalize what I saw. Maybe it was a bear with mange. But bears don't stand and walk like that. They don't have hands that grip the ground with distinct fingers, and they definitely don't scream like that. A person in a costume in the middle of nowhere at midnight, and no costume could explain the way it moved. So fluid and powerful. The only thing that makes any sense is the one thing that shouldn't exist. I saw a Bigfoot. I don't care if people think I'm crazy. I know what I saw. It wasn't just some animal. The way it looked at me, there was intelligence there and purpose, like it wanted me to see it. Sometimes I wake up hearing that scream in my dreams. I can still picture its face perfectly. The flat features, the deep-set eyes, the way its mouth stretched impossibly wide when it screamed. I've tried talking to a few friends about it, but I can see the disbelief in their faces. They think I dozed off while driving or saw a bear or a deer, and my tired brain filled in the blanks. But I know what I saw. That thing was real. And the worst part is wondering How many of them are out there in those woods? I drive past those trees every day and wonder if they're watching from just beyond the tree line. I've been researching similar encounters in Arkansas, and there have been reports in these woods going back decades. Hunters talking about strange screams, hikers finding unusual footprints, people describing a large bipedal creature crossing roads at night. I never paid attention to those stories before. Now I can't stop thinking about them. Last week, my co-worker mentioned she thought she saw something weird crossing the road late at night in almost the same spot. She laughed it off, saying she needed more sleep. I didn't tell her about my experience. I couldn't bring myself to. I'm not sure what to do with this experience. I haven't reported it officially because I don't want to be labeled as the crazy nurse who sees monsters. But I needed to tell someone who might understand, someone who wouldn't immediately dismiss it. I still work the late shift sometimes. We're still short-staffed, but I keep pepper spray in my car now. I know it probably wouldn't do anything against something that size, but it makes me feel a little better. I also installed a dash cam, hoping that if I ever see it again, I'll have proof. But part of me hopes I never do. Whatever I saw that night, it wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't supposed to be real. But it was, and I can't unsee it. I can't unfeel that primal fear when it screamed at me. I can't forget the way it rose up from all fours to stand on two legs in one smooth motion, like it had been pretending to be something else until I caught it. I don't know if I'll ever drive that road again. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe in the dark again. All I know is that something is out there in those Arkansas woods, something that stands over 7 feet tall, moves with purpose, and screams with enough force to make your bones vibrate, and I was lucky to drive away from it. Story 18. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night in 91 or 92. Can't remember the exact year anymore, but some things you just don't forget, no matter how much time passes. I was driving home from my late shift at the factory. This was in rural Missouri, about 20 miles outside Springfield. It was probably around 1 in the morning, pitch black, with no streetlights on these back roads, just my headlights cutting through the darkness and that endless Missouri countryside all around. I'd driven this route hundreds of times before, but that night was different. I first noticed the eye shine from about 50 yards away. Wasn't unusual to see deer or other wildlife on these roads at night. So I slowed down a bit, but as I got closer, I realized the eye shine was way too high off the ground to be a deer, way too high to be anything that should exist in these woods. My headlights finally caught it full on, standing right at the edge of the tree line. I almost drove off the damn road. It was massive, like nothing I'd ever seen before. Reddish-brown hair covered its entire body. It was standing upright on 2 legs, and I swear to God it had to be at least 8 feet tall. Maybe taller. The size of it. I remember thinking it had to be 600 pounds, maybe even 800. Just impossibly big. The thing that really sticks with me is what it did when my headlights hit it. It raised its arm, not like a human would, but this massive long limb, and covered its face, like the light hurt its eyes. The arm seemed weirdly long compared to its body, hanging down past where a human's knees would be. The movement was so deliberate, so intelligent. I don't remember hitting the gas, but suddenly I was flying down that road at 80 miles an hour, white-knuckling the steering wheel. I didn't stop until I got home, locked the doors, and sat in my kitchen with all the lights on until sunrise. I told myself all the usual things. It was a bear standing on its hind legs. It was some guy in a costume playing a prank. I was tired and seeing things, but I knew better. There's nothing in Missouri that looks like what I saw that night. Nothing that should exist anyway. I pushed it down, tried to forget about it, and for a while I did a pretty good job. Life went on. I got a promotion, met my husband, and in 2003 we decided to buy some property and build our dream house. We found this beautiful 119-acre place, mostly woods, with a nice clearing for the house. Only later did I realize it was about 7 miles from where I'd had my encounter all those years ago. The first couple years were peaceful. We built our place, and my mom moved into a trailer on the property about a quarter-mile from our house. She liked her independence but wanted to be close as she got older. Everything was normal, or as normal as life gets. Then the weird stuff started happening. Mom called one morning, sounding shaken, said something had been hitting her trailer door the night before. Not knocking, but something heavy slamming against it. She thought maybe it was raccoons or coyotes at first, but whatever it was strong enough to make the whole trailer shake. I told her to call me immediately if it happened again. A few weeks later, she called at around 2 in the morning. I grabbed my shotgun and drove over, but by the time I got there, whatever it was had gone. The only evidence was some scratches on her metal door that hadn't been there before. Then came the rock throwing. Mom had this habit of sitting outside in the evenings and tossing small rocks into the yard, said it helped her think. One evening she called me in a panic. She'd been throwing rocks like usual when suddenly rocks started being thrown back from the darkness of the woods. Not just rolling back downhill, but actively thrown with force. She came inside immediately and didn't go out after dark for weeks. The really unnerving incident happened about a month later. Mom called me around midnight, absolutely terrified. She said she'd been woken up by what sounded like a pack of dogs running through the property. These woods have coyotes, so that wasn't too strange. But what happened next was, she said she heard what she could only describe as something talking in animal language to the dogs. Then the dogs went silent, completely silent. She said the voice sounded like what an 800-pound gorilla might sound like if it could talk. Deep, guttural, but with clear patterns and inflections that suggested language, not just animal noises. The strangest part? Those dogs, which had been a regular feature in our woods for years, were never heard again. Not once. I started noticing things at our house too. Rocks hitting the roof and siding at night. Heavy footsteps on our wraparound porch that would stop the moment I turned on the outside lights. I'd go out with my gun, but never found anything. No tracks, no evidence, just the feeling of being watched from the tree line. Then the wood knocking started. If you've ever spent time in the deep woods, you know most forest sounds, but these weren't woodpeckers or branches falling. These were deliberate. One knock, then two in response from another direction. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I'd hear 3 distinct knocks that seemed to come from just beyond our clearing. I started keeping a log of when they happened, always between midnight and 3 in the morning, always when there was no wind or storm that could explain them. My husband thought I was losing it at first. He's a city guy originally, not used to rural life. He'd say it was just the house settling, or animals, or my imagination getting the best of me after my mum's stories. But even he couldn't explain away what happened in the summer of 2009. We'd invested in some decent night vision equipment by then. Not military grade, but good enough to see clear across our property on a moonless night. I'd been sitting on the porch, scanning the tree line with my scope like I'd taken to doing most evenings. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards from the house, just inside the tree line, something was watching us. Through the green glow of the night vision, I could make out a figure standing upright between 2 oak trees. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its arms hung down past its knees, just like what I'd seen on the road all those years ago. But what struck me most was its head. It had this slight conical shape at the top, almost like a crowned head. Not quite pointed, but definitely not shaped like a human head. I nudged my husband and silently handed him the scope. His face went white. He could see it too. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. Without thinking, he stood up and took a step toward the yard. I tried to grab his arm, but he was already moving. He took about 3 steps off the porch, and in that instant, the figure was gone. Not like it ran away. There was no movement, no sound of branches breaking or leaves rustling. It was there 1 second, and the next it had simply vanished, like it had never been there at all. We stayed up all night with the doors locked and guns loaded. In the morning, we checked the spot where we'd seen it. The ground was hard from lack of rain, but there was a clear disturbance in the leaf litter, a large, roughly oval area where something heavy had been standing. The surrounding vegetation was bent outward, like something had moved through it in a hurry. After that night, my husband never questioned my stories again. We seriously considered selling the property, but this was our dream home. And whatever this thing was, it hadn't actually harmed us. It seemed more curious than threatening. We still live here. The incidents come and go. Sometimes months will pass with nothing unusual. Then we'll have a week of nightly visits. The rock throwing seems to happen most in the spring and fall. The wood knocks are most common in summer. We rarely see it directly anymore. It's like once it knew we could see it, it became more cautious. Mom passed away 3 years ago, but before she died, she made me promise not to sell the property. She said whatever lived in these woods had been here long before us and would be here long after. Our job wasn't to fight it or fear it, but to respect its territory. I don't know what it is. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, some undiscovered species. The label doesn't really matter to me anymore. What matters is that I know it's real. I've seen it twice now with my own eyes. I've heard it communicate. I've felt its presence watching from the darkness. Sometimes, on summer nights when the windows are open, I still hear those knocks from the forest. 1, then 2, then 3. And sometimes, though I've never told anyone this before, I knock back.